the Hagmann Hagmann Report for today. It is Wednesday. It's Wednesday, September 10th, 2014. Just one more day, 13 years from 9/11, 2001, and of course, 2 years to the anniversary of the attack at Benghazi. Folks, I'm Doug Hagmann in studio with my son Joe Hagmann. Together we are the Hagmann Hagmann Report. We've got a very extremely exciting show lined up for you tonight. You're about to hear 3 hours of incredible programming that you're not going to hear on the mainstream media by the captured media. You're listening to the only show where the news and various topics are within the news are presented to you in 3D. We look well beyond the headlines and bylines, and we look into, in addition to looking well beyond the fog of disinformation and misinformation brought to you courtesy of the mainstream media, we go to experts. We contact experts or have experts on as guests who can interpret current events and do interpret current events matching the headlines. And I've got to tell you something, okay, folks. I've been doing radio now for about 10 years, believe it or not, starting out quite a long time ago. Still haven't gotten very good at it. However, Joe and I have been doing this now for about 2 years, and there are a few things that I can say. Well, I could probably count maybe on both hands the programs that are must-listen-tos. When I say that, I'm talking about their integral parts of. I mean, I consider they're all. Y'all should listen to them. Listen to them all, but some programs stand out from the rest, and I'll tell you why. They mark a convergence of current events, biblical prophecy, sound biblical doctrine, and analysis, investigative analysis that bears through the scrutiny of peer review. Our guest tonight is Mr. Bill Salas. Before we bring him on, I want to say that I've gotten a lot of email messages from new listeners all across the globe. Our show is growing tremendously at a tremendous rate. We want to thank you for that. Each and every person out there, thank you for telling someone else about the show. Thank you for being part of our extended family of listeners. And I truly mean that from the bottom of my heart. Both Joe and I do. You folks are tremendous. And I often say that we do have the most intelligent audience in the world, and I think we do. The quality of emails that we receive, the links that we receive, the quality of letters, cards, information that we receive is tremendous. Joe and I got a box the size of an egg carton turned sideways of binders the other day. I shouldn't say the other day, it was about 2 weeks ago. Tremendous information. Bill, Bob, Roger, Robert, some other contacts. Thank you for sending the various envelopes, the various information you've sent. We look at it all. Folks, you're listening to, the only show that brings you the news in 3D. We broadcast live each and every weeknight from 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern. Our home base now is Hagmann.com. We're having some issues with that, but we hope to be up and running by midnight tonight. Again, full on assault. That's Hagmann.com. We're simulcast by the Christians United Broadcasting Network. There you can tune us in at the Hagmann.com. I want to thank you for joining us and thank you for your belief and trust in us as we walk through this minefield of current events together. And this will be a show to remember. Bill Salas is one of my favorite people. We met him at the Orlando conference. As a matter of fact, there's a photograph of Joe and I with Bill Salas at the Orlando conference at Hagmann.com under the photo section. Go ahead and click on that. You can see what Bill looks like, and of course, the fact that we were very fortunate to meet him. Having said that, we do have Bill on Skype with us. Joe, welcome to the studio. I want to make sure that Bill can hear us and we can hear him. Bill, can you can you hear us? Okay. I can see your lips move, buddy. He can hear us, but we can't hear him. So there's an issue somewhere, a programming issue. What we'll do is, I've got your message, Bill, in Skype, and what we'll do is we'll just do it that way. If that's all right with you, Bill, is that okay with you, sir? You can just nod. Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to reconnect in a different manner. Joe, can you see what I see or no?
Yeah.
But can you see that little print there?
Oh, no, I don't see the conversation.
Okay. I'm sitting 3 feet away from it, and I need new glasses. I can't see that. Okay, there we go. Stand by here. What we'll do is we'll just make this call right now. Let me see if my writing is as good as it should be.
Bill's new book, Nuclear Showdown in Iran, Revealing the Ancient Prophecy of Elam, is his newest book, and it is fantastic. To say about that. Well, while you're doing that, folks, I want to tell you something. It seems like every time we have a guest on, we talk about books. Oh, you got to buy the book. Well, let me tell you something. Nuclear Showdown in Iran by Bill Salas. He sent us a copy. This, like Paul McGuire's book, this book I sat down and I read, and he also sent some other material as well, some supporting documentation for his book. Here's the deal, in my view. Here's the deal. As we look at the headlines that are on television or we have Bill with us on the hard line.
Okay.
All right, there we go. He dropped off. There's the echo.
All right.
Hello, I'm on the other line, yes.
Okay. Hi, Bill. I just want to say this. Yeah, Bill, can you hear us?
Sure can.
Okay. As we look at the world headlines, and I just want to say thank you so much for not just sending the book to us, but writing the book. Few programs few topics, programs I think have really I don't want to say shaken me up. But when I look at this from an investigative point of view, what you've written, I'm hard-pressed. If I was on the opposite side of you in a courtroom and you had this book as your presenting a case, I got to tell you, I'd be scared of losing my case against what you've written. He's done such a great job of writing this. Folks, Iran, nuclear showdown, question mark. It's an ancient prophecy concerning Elam coming to pass in our time. I did not realize what the prophecy of Elam was, or actually it was kind of buried in there. And I'm going to let Bill expand upon this. However, let me just kind of set the stage here. Go back and look at earlier this year, as world leaders, they hastily attempt to persuade Iran to stop enriching uranium and put the brakes on their nuclear program. The Russian bear, think about this now, they've risen in the uttermost parts of the north from its pre-Cold War slumber. Unlike the decade-old jihad of the Palestinians to retake the 2,100 square miles encompassing the West Bank, Russia annexed nearly 5 times that much territory with scarcely a struggle when it captured Crimea back in March of 2014, just several months ago. Russia's uncontested resurgence upon the world scene has some Bible prophecy pundits wondering if Putin could very well be the infamous Gog of Magog, and as described in Ezekiel 38. And Bill has written about Ezekiel 38, of course, Psalm 83, and so on. But Ezekiel declared that the most massive Mideast invasion in human history would occur in the latter days. And folks, I would contend, and I think everyone around me would contend, that we're living in the latter days, latter years. Israel and Russia are clearly identified in the Hebrew prophets' ancient predictions. According to the prophecy, Gog assembles together an almost unstoppable coalition that requires divine intervention from the God of the Jews in order to prevent a Russian takeover. And we've had Bill on before talking about the Psalm 83 war in Ezekiel 38. In fact, Ezekiel 38 declares that these Russian hordes invade Israel to carry away its booty and plunder. Now, in this future epic event, Russia is flanked on one side by Turkey, to Turkey to its west, and Iran to its east. Both countries currently have strained relations with Israel, and right now Iran is looked upon as Israel's greatest national security concern. So the stage has been set for what Bill is going to be talking about tonight. Folks, if you go to HagmannHagmann.com, click on the link on the left-hand side. It'll take you directly to Bill's website under what it says broadcast. It's all there, directly to his book, Nuclear Showdown in Iran. It's all there for you. Bill, I just want to say welcome to the program. It's really a sobering topic that we're going to be talking about this evening.
Yes, great, and that was a great prelude to it, and it's good to be back on your program.
Great to have you. Joe, you up there? All right, there we go. We're connected, okay.
Are we getting a little crackling on the line?
Yeah, we are, Bill. But
not sure where that's coming from.
I'm wondering if it's my landline. You want to try? You can try my cell phone, or we can try to reconnect on this line. One or the other. I just sent you on Skype my cell phone number. If you want to try that.
Okay. We can do that. Sure. Why don't we do that?
Let's see if that's better.
All right. We'll go ahead and cut it off, and we'll call you right back here. So.
Okay, great. Let's try that.
All right. Live radio at its finest, folks. And you know what? We've got storms passing over us as well, so it's, who knows? But we'll try. We'll give this a try and see if this will work. Let me see if I can reach Joe here with this note. But folks, I got to tell you, what Bill has written is perhaps one of the most incredible books I've read about the Iranian, just about what's taking place, Elam. And if you do a search on Elam is an area of Iran that is, I would say, would be the southwest part of Iran. Let me just double check that. Yes, that's correct. Okay, it'd be the southwest portion of Iran. And you know what's located at the biggest nuclear reactor Iran has? So keep that in mind. Hi, Bill.
Hi.
All right.
Is that better? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, actually, for a cell phone, absolutely. We're cooking.
Oh, right.
What happened? Okay, there we go. All right. So anyway, Bill, what a fantastic book, what a fantastic, and I mean fantastic topic to be talking about given today's headlines and everything that's going on today. So I want you to start off, Bill, with how did this book come about? Because it didn't seem to be a deliberate effort to ferret out these prophetic utterances in Jeremiah or from the Bible.
Right. Well, the book was, it's interesting. I'd written something about this prophecy in my Psalm 83 book that came out in early January of 2013, and I had a chapter in there, and I thought it was an important prophecy that had been vastly overlooked, and I was content to leave it at that, kind of say a few things about it in that book. But then I was on, I think it was around April or May of 2013 last year, I was on a TBN, Praise the Lord TV show with Jonathan Cahn, and they were featuring his book, The Harbinger, and my book, Psalm 83. And sitting next to me, they had a guest named Reza Safa, who is an American-Iranian who is with TBN on Najat TV, and they reach into Iran through satellite television and give them Christian broadcasting. and it's quite successful. And so I'm sitting with him, and we're just moments before going live. The audience is already packed into the studio in Costa Mesa, California at TBN. The cameras are ready to go. We're going to go in front of millions of people. They're putting makeup on us. And Reza Safa goes, "Have you seen this prophecy?" And he holds up an iPad and puts it right in front of me. And I've never met Reza until that time. And he was dealing with this prophecy of Elam, which is the central theme of the Nuclear Showdown book in Iran. And he says this prophecy, Jeremiah 49, verses 34 through 39, is something that the many Iranian Christians are looking forward to finding fulfillment, because they believe it will be an opportunity for them to leave the repressive regime of Iran and go into the nations of the world, and in the nations of the world to therefore preach the gospel as part of the ministry of reconciliation. And I looked at him and I said, "Well, I'm familiar with that prophecy. I'm somewhat familiar with the burgeoning Christian phenomena over there." He told me also in that Iran was the number one growing evangelical population in the world, which is in the World Fact Book, they're growing at 19.6%. But the point is, I thought, well, I didn't know it was that big of a growth expansion, but I said I am familiar with the fact that there's many Iranian Christians there. But I said I do not believe that this prophecy is the best exit strategy for these Iranians, because it talks about a disaster. And it isn't a picture of the Ayatollah standing on the boundaries of Iran, handing out exit visas to the Iranians. And then at that point, the show began, and that's the last I've spoken to Reza on the matter. But I asked the Lord. I said, "Lord, what was that all about?" And through a series of other events that happened afterwards, I felt confirmed that I needed to unpack this prophecy more, and therefore I wrote the book earlier. I spent this year writing it, and it came out just a couple months ago. But, it's a very vastly overlooked prophecy. I think it could be the next major biblical prophecy to find fulfillment, apart from maybe Psalm 83, or maybe the rapture, or maybe the destruction of Damascus in Isaiah 17. It could actually be the prophecy that leads to the fulfillment of the other Middle East prophecies.
I mean, it's absolutely fantastic. The way you set that up, I just thought that was really interesting, how you set that up, and how when you wrote the book, how you kind of explained how that you were kind of taking notice of that particular prophecy. And I thought, isn't that the way? Isn't that the way God talks to a lot of us? Is kind of through nudges, instead of like a piano falling on somebody's head. It's by saying, "Hey, have you seen this?" And I thought it was so great the way that developed from there, and how you developed it. But I find it amazing too, Bill, that we could have men, prophets, 2,000 years ago. Really, when I read your book, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, here we have prophet 2,000 years ago, talking about, perhaps referencing Iran's nuclear program today. I thought, wow, how fabulous is it, or how wondrous is that?
What's interesting, Doug, not to interrupt, what's interesting is that for your listeners, they might even, and I'd like to read the prophecy to them, because it's only 6 verses, but it contains a plethora of details that can guide us through to what the event is about. It's a short amount of verses, but power-packed with information. And if they do want to have their Bibles open, it's Jeremiah 49 and the last 6 verses of the chapter. But again, it's as I started to read this, study this, and research this to write this book, I was very concerned, because it sounds so much like current events that you read in the Bible. And it's almost like, I wanted to be careful that this wouldn't be what we call classic newspaper exegesis, where you have current events and you try to match them up to biblical scriptures, try to marry them up together to come up with some kind of viewpoint or something like that. And so I continuously was in prayer about this, because the more I started to study this information and unpack it and research the history to make sure it hadn't already been fulfilled. And there's hardly anything written about this prophecy. It's been vastly overlooked. You're going to find it very difficult to find even a commentary on this. You'll find a few pages in Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum's Footsteps of the Messiah book. You'll find a little bit of presentation done by Bill Coney or Joe Rosenberg, maybe an article or two over the internet. And that's really about the extent of it. So I had to be real careful to go through and find everything I could on it. I had to check all the history to see what had happened in this specific area, to see if it had been historically fulfilled. And as I started to uncover all this and realized that this prophecy has not found fulfillment, that the more you look into it, it does appear to be talking about a potential disaster that could be nuclear related. The prophecy clearly talks about a disaster that could be nuclear related, that leads to appears to be a humanitarian crisis, because as I read the prophecy to your listeners, they're going to understand that, there's a worldwide dispersion that comes out of this judgment, and it's a judgment upon this specific area of Iran today. So what we'll do in this show is we'll give a picture of the area, we'll talk about the prophecy itself, and then we'll try to give an interpretation of what could happen, what it seems to be talking about, and try to unpack the whole thing for them so they can kind of get a geographical picture and a geopolitical picture of what's going on. Because what they're hearing and they're going to start hearing a whole lot more about Iran, because the nuclear negotiations are coming up again. Matter of fact, Iran seems to be pushing for them. The deadline for talks is going to be November 24th, which was extended from July 20th. They couldn't come to terms with the P5+1 negotiators, which would be the U.S., Britain, France, Russia, China, and then +1 would be Germany. They couldn't come to terms with them by the July 20th deadline, so they pushed it out 4 months or so to November 24th. But what they seem to be wanting to do right now is hasten that up, and they're getting talks, I believe it's going to be September 18th, and they're going to try to see what they can do between now and November 24th. And the thoughts are that they're concerned about an Israeli preemptive strike on their nuclear program, and they would rather start talking now to perhaps stave that off. Meanwhile, Israel, some reports suggest, is preparing for a very violent war with Hezbollah to the northern part of their borders, having just come off the heels of their campaign, roughly 50 days battle with Hamas. So we got all these things going on, and it could very well be that this prophecy we're talking about is going to be finding fulfillment. And it hasn't found fulfillment yet. I point out in the book that it appears to be an imminent event. It does not appear to be part of the tribulation period. It does not seem to be part of the prophecy called Gog of Magog in Ezekiel 38 and 39, the one that most people think about when they talk about the future of Iran in the latter days or in Bible prophecy. And so it seems to be distinct of that, and the timing seems to be quite imminent. So I think, why don't you ask some questions, but ultimately let's try to read the prophecy to them. Let's try to give them a geopolitical and geographical understanding of what's going on. And let's tell them about Iran, not only from the historical and the world view, but from the biblical view about what's going on.
Well, and I think a couple of things you mentioned first, though. And one thing that you told me, in fact, when we were having a conversation off air, I was just amazed when you told me about the greatest Christian revival in the world taking place in Iran. In fact, that was a headline in the World Daily back in 2012. And I didn't, that really didn't strike me as being significant at the time. And then when you put it in the perspective of the prophecies, or of the prophecy that you're referencing here, of course, now I'm thinking, well, wait a second, this is important. And as you develop this, and as you point out, unpack it to this prophecy, it becomes more and more important. And the other thing you mentioned too, and folks, I really want to kind of drive this point home as well. There are a lot of times biblical, do I want to say biblical scholars, use that word, or eschatologists or whatever, will attempt to retrofit or fit, what would you call them, headlines, current events headlines with biblical prophecy. And what happens is, it would be like an investigator like me coming to a conclusion on a case and working toward that conclusion instead of working, using the facts to build the case to a conclusion. This is you did it the right way in this book. That's my belief based on from reading it. You actually took the facts, looked at it very objectively, omitted any kind of preconceived conclusion, and built on the facts. And I have to commend you for that.
Well, what transpired and what was interesting is this book was going to be pretty much understanding the prophecy, seeing if it was for our time. And really for me, when I study Bible prophecy, I'm interested in all of Bible prophecy, especially the unfulfilled prophecies, but especially those that are probably imminent or, could happen in my generation, my children's generation, my grandchildren's generation. And sure. I'm very interested in, of course, the tribulation and the harlot world religion and the Antichrist and the mark of the beast and all those types of things. But quite frankly, as a pre-trib rapture believer, I'm probably not going to be here to experience that on the earth. So I'm more concerned about what could happen right now, and that's why my focus has been so far on my teachings and writings on those events that appear to be, forthcoming in the very near future, and I believe this would be one of those. Now, as I was studying this, I was just trying to make sure that it is a relevant prophecy for our time. And I wasn't going to go a whole lot deeper than that, other than the Lord led me into different areas where I started meeting Iranian Christians, for instance, Hormoz Shariat of Iran Alive Ministries, who Joe Rosenberg, a very successful Christian author, calls the Billy Graham of Iran. Became friends with him. He's got a TV show that reaches like Najat TV with TVN. It's called Iran Alive Ministries. It reaches into Iran through satellite television over the heads of the mullahs. It's very effective. Many people are coming to the Lord in Iran through these types of shows. So I hooked up with him. We've done 4 TV shows together in his studio into Iran. I would speak in English and he would translate into Farsi. He wanted them to know about the rapture, the people that are watching his shows. And there, at any given time, several million watching one of his shows. And then he wanted to talk about Ezekiel 38, about this Elam prophecy that we're talking about right now. He wanted to talk about Psalm 83. So as I went through this process, it turned out that the bigger story was the backstory, the spiritual showdown, not just the nuclear showdown that we're going to be seeing on the news here, quite inundated with it over the next couple of months, but the backdrop there, the spiritual showdown going down. And like I was saying earlier, it's actually Operation World, which is it's a prayer guide. Most missionary-minded churches have this sort of like a handbook in their library, and it talks about the growing evangelical populations, and it ranks them, and Iran is number 1. Afghanistan's number 2, and Tajikistan's number 10 of the top 10, and those are all Farsi-speaking countries. So the 3 primary Farsi-speaking countries are in the top 10 of the evangelical growth growing on in the world. They're very, very disenchanted with Islam. And I don't want to rabbit trail off of the subject too much, but we don't want to also conclude this program without getting into what's really going on behind the scenes there. Just a brief thing before we get into the prophecy is that, most of the population in Iran is about 80% of them or so are under 35 years or younger. And the Islamic takeover of the Shah in 1979 in Iran, a lot of this youth bulge over there was not even born. So the mullahs came into power around 1979, and immediately they went to a war with Iraq, which was this, a war of attrition for about 8 years. And ever since, things haven't been good for them. And so you've got many of these Iranians that are not happy with their whole circumstances there. It's very repressive over there. The social injustice, if you don't do what they want. I mean, there's women that get thrown in jail for not wearing their headdress, their hijab. Just terrible, horrendous stories. And, of course, now they're persecuting the Christians. About 2 years ago, when Ahmadinejad was president, Ayatollah Khomeini issued a decree to close all home churches, to imprison all Christian pastors, and to persecute all Christians. And we estimate that before when the takeover in 1979, there was approximately 500 professing Christians in Iran. And estimates now are there's at least 1 million. It's hard to get a head count on them. And a lot of them have tried to get out of Iran, and some have successfully. But we think there could be as many as 3 to 5 million, and that is burgeoning. These people are coming to the Lord in multitudes over there. And I spoke with one of the key leaders over there. I can't give you his name because if found out, he would definitely be in jail immediately.
Right.
And they have a process where they go around and they make friends with the Iranian families, and they'll get invited to their house, and they'll start talking about stories. And one of the first stories they'll talk about would be, of course, Noah. Because remember, Iran is predominantly a Muslim country, predominantly a Shiite Muslim country. And what happens is a lot of the stories are very similar in the Quran as the Bible, because the Quran is sort of a bad copy in some ways of the Bible. Muhammad, of course, copied a lot of things and got a lot of it wrong, and then spun off into his old pagan scenario. But so the Noah story, they can identify with that. They're not bringing up anything about Jesus, which they call Isa over there. And then the next week they'll talk about Abraham, who's the patriarch of, Islam and Judaism and Christianity. And then they'll get in and they'll talk about some more stories. Then about the 6th, or I think it's the 7th week, they will introduce them to Isa, to Jesus as the Savior. And by then, they're very receptive. They've embraced these individuals into their families. And the conversion rate is unbelievable. And it's not like a lot of the Muslim countries where, if you become a Christian, you're ostracized and you're kicked out of the family. A lot of these people, they look at their family members and the conversions going on and the changed lives and the hope that comes into their lives. Because remember, for the most part, a lot of these people feel they're already dead because the repression that's going on to them is so severe that they come alive and they're willing to face martyrdom and persecution. And they, so if one family member gets it, it isn't uncommon for many of the other family members to become born-again believers through that process.
Well, Bill, thanks for going down that trail. I know you necessarily didn't necessarily want to go down that road, but when I was reading through this book, that was in the back of my mind, and I wonder how many people really understand what's the Christian revival in Iran, and I certainly didn't understand the magnitude, and praise God for that. And I think that has a lot that sets the undertone of the overview of Jeremiah 49 verses 34 through 39, which you call the prophecy, or which is called the prophecy of Elam, and it's what preferably, if you, to the extent possible, if you could provide our listeners with a thumbnail sketch of Jeremiah's prophecy concerning Elam, which, as I had mentioned, is Elam, and you can look this up, folks, on the internet. It's in Iran. It's in the southwest portion. It's right around the Persian Gulf, but dead center in there is the Bashir nuclear power plant, and I think that's an important thing, folks, for you to keep in mind. But having said all of that, what did you find with Jeremiah 49? Verses 34 through 39. Is that a good place to start, sir?
It is, and I would preface it this way also by telling your audience that they should care, because the common thought would be, look, I'm over here in America, and that's way over there across the world, across the Atlantic, across the Mediterranean Sea, and as long as it doesn't bother me and mainly confines itself to the local neighborhood over there, I find it curious, I find it interesting, but I don't know that I want to devote a lot of time to, understanding it. But we're dealing with a major world-changing prophecy here that will lead to a disaster, a humanitarian crisis where the exiles will be expelled into every nation of the world, possibly even into the neighborhoods of your listeners. But we're dealing with the bigger problem, the elephant in the room in the Middle East. This Hamas-Israel incursion, or Operation Protective Edge, was child's play. Israel was just dealing with the hornet in the room. They've got the bigger issues they got to deal with now, and of course you got Hezbollah to the north with 100,000 missiles, at least 5,000 of them that can do serious damage and hit any bank of targets in Israel. And they've already got a whole bunch of bank of targets Hezbollah knows they want to hit. And it'll be too much for their Iron Dome and arrow systems to handle if it comes at them extremely rapidly, which it could. And like I said, Israel is seemingly preparing for a violent war with Hezbollah next. And but the other thing, too, is that Iran has threatened to shut down the Strait of Hormuz if their nuclear program is attacked. That would be crippling upon world economies because about 60% of the world oil comes through that black triangle of oil over through there. And they've also threatened to put cycles of violence and terror in America. And many of us are concerned that that's a very genuine threat because it's pretty much known that they have sent in terrorists through Hezbollah ranks and things like that through the borders of Central America through Mexico, trained them to understand the Mexican culture a little bit, and now they're embedded in America waiting to do their damage. So these are threats that Iran has forwarded. Are they rumors of war? Are they saber-rattling? Or are they genuine threats? Well, Israel's taking them very seriously because among those threats is, of course, the ambition to wipe Israel off the map, and that's, of course, not only are they trying to get a nuclear weapon to spread their hegemony throughout the Middle East, their control and sovereignty over the Middle East, but they also want to destroy Israel. So, as we talk about this prophecy, let's put it into content. We're dealing with a very powerful, formidable force over there that is working feverishly, spinning about 19,000 centrifuges, although they may not all be spinning right now. Supposedly they say about 10,000. But they're spinning 19,000, or have the potential to, centrifuges, which estimates are that in 6 weeks, if you spin that many centrifuges, you can have a nuclear weapon. So, this is, they're on the threshold of becoming a nuclear nation, and that's what Israel is extremely concerned about. So I hope we have an opportunity to talk about the geopolitics of all that, but let's get into the prophecy for a minute. It says that rather than reading the whole 6 verses, it talks about the Lord gets fiercely angered by Iran. And because he gets fiercely angered, he judges Iran. And when we talk about Elam, and this prophecy is confined to Elam, E-L-A-M, you've mentioned it, it's that area that hugs the Persian Gulf. It comprises about a sixth of what is modern-day Iran today. So when Jeremiah wrote this prophecy, which was written around 596 B.C., written about 10 years or so before Ezekiel wrote his prophecy, Ezekiel 38, the one that is much more popularized, much more understood in prophecy circles was Ezekiel's prophecy. When you look at a modern-day map of Iran, you see Persia and Elam. And Persia, of course, was the dominant area. But so he writes this prophecy, and that particular area is going to be affected by it. It doesn't talk about Persia being affected. It talks about that specific area. And you'd mentioned that is where the Bashar nuclear plant is. Now, that nuclear plant is the pride and joy of Iran right now. It came under construction in the early 70s by the Germans. They hightailed out in 1979 when the Ayatollah took over, and then Iran tried to build upon it, but they successfully contracted with Russia in 1995 to complete the job. So you've got a nuclear plant that's 40 years old with a 30-year-old cooling system with no one trained in it to handle a nuclear disaster like the one that hit Fukushima. It's built with 3 different types of parts, German, Iranian, and Russian. It's built where 3 tectonic plates converge right on the Gulf, the Persian Gulf, and Iran itself is about 90% seismic. Matter of fact, they've had their earthquakes recently. We'll talk about those as well, but they've had them throughout their time. And the neighborhood is very concerned about this. The Gulf states across over there, the GCC, the Gulf Collaborative Council, they're very concerned about this. We'll get into that as well. But so there's going to be this judgment on the area. And it says that the Lord is going to break the bow of Elam and strike them at the foremost of their might. And I'll tell you why that's significant in a moment. But then it says, and after that judgment happens, the Lord is going to bring the 4 winds from the 4 quarters of heaven and scatter the Elamites, those Iranians in that area, toward all those winds. a worldwide scattering. It says there'll be no nation where the outcasts of Elam, the exiles, don't go. So we're not talking about an isolated dispersion confined to the area there, like you're seeing with Syria. The Syrian revolution has been going on for about 3 years now, right, since 2011. That's a bad situation. 22 million people in Syria, about 12 million affected, about 6 million displaced. You got about 1.1 million up in Lebanon. You got some in Turkey, some in Iraq, Jordan, and Egypt. But those are neighboring areas, refugee camps and things like that. Now, we're not talking about that. It says it's going to be there'll be no nation where the outcasts of Elam don't go. Then it talks about Iran or Elam being dismayed as a result of what happens to them. It says before their enemies and before those who seek their life. So we're talking about at the time this happens, Elam has enemies, plural, not singularly, not just an enemy. And so I get into the book and I explain, well, who would those enemies be? So if we have an opportunity, we'll talk about that as well. Then it talks about this disaster and that the sword will go after them, so it has a military connotation. It could be an earthquake, but it seems more like it's a military campaign that is being used as a form of this judgment. And those are the first 4 verses of that section. And then it closes with some good news, and this is why Reza Safa and Hormuz Shariat talks about this too on Iran Alive Ministries. The good news is in the last 2 verses, in verses 38 and 39, and it says, I'll set my throne in Elam and destroy from there the king and the princes. That's verse 38. And it says, and in the latter years, I will bring back the captives of Elam. So in other words, God is going to set his throne up in Elam, in Iran. And there's 3 places we find in the Bible where God sets his throne up. And one of them is where it is right now in the book of Isaiah, and that's in heaven. It says, heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool. The other one is in Jeremiah, I think it's chapter 3, and it talks about Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is, of course, that would be when the Messiah reigns, Jesus Christ returns and reigns during the Messianic kingdom. So we have this thing thrown in here. There's going to be a throne. It's the same Hebrew word in Jeremiah 3 for throne that's going to be in Jerusalem, in Elam. So I write about what that could mean. Is it a literal throne? Is it a place of authority that's governed over there by non-Muslim Iranians? What could it mean? So I get into that in the book. But the good news is, and this is a theme in end times prophecy with a lot of nationalities, is that there will be a remnant of Iranians that come through all this, and they will ultimately populate the Messianic kingdom with Christ when he reigns. You'll have Egyptians there, you'll have Assyrians, you'll have Jordanians, you'll have Israelis, of course. There'll be a faithful remnant. So that's the good news for Iran, is that they will ultimately have a remnant that comes through the tribulation and things like that. Now, I would just say on a side note, the Christians that live in Iran right now, and this is one of the things we emphasize when I go on TV with Hormuz Shariat into Iran, is, the best exit strategy for them is not this prophecy. If the rapture occurs before this prophecy, because I believe the rapture is also imminent, that's the best exit strategy, because they will be whisked up to be with the Lord in the clouds, in the twinkling of an eye, with the shadow of an archangel and the sound of the trumpet, and they will be with the Lord forever, and they won't have to experience this or Ezekiel 38. However, there will be some that experience this that are maybe not there. If this happens before the rapture, or if it happens after the rapture, you're going to have these Iranians there who will go through it that were left behind, and many of them will come to know the Lord. And they will have to, unfortunately, go through the perils of the end times and the tribulation, but ultimately there will be a remnant of them. And I believe that's what's being said there. So that's just sort of a nutshell summary of what those 6 verses say. And what could it be that this disaster what would be the nature of such a disaster? Not just a revolution.
Go wrong, though? I didn't mean to interrupt, but, as you described where Bashir, the plant and where it's located, and of course seismic activity and so on. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? But I'll leave that to you to explain.
What could possibly go wrong with the Bashir nuclear plant?
Yeah. For one, as one potential event that could spell disaster there, it's holy cow. I mean, built on tectonic plates, and you've got all sorts of potentials for disaster.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment. It's a very fragile facility, and as a matter of fact, last year, let me open something up here on my computer real quick. Last year, they had an earthquake. It was a 6.8, and it hit right at the Bashar area. It was on April 10th of 2013. 37 people were killed. At that time, a week later, by the way, there was a 7.7 that hit in Iran by the Pakistan border in Iran. And around that time, the Russians, who, just to add a little interest to your listeners, the Russians are deeply embedded in the construction of that facility. And as a matter of fact, they loaded Russian fuel rods into that facility. We believe it was around August of 2010. At the time, former UN Ambassador John Bolton said that Israel's window of opportunity to strike that facility was rapidly closing, because once those fuel rods were loaded, a strike on that facility could create a nuclear disaster. That was back when the fuel rods were being loaded. Now, when these earthquakes hit, suspiciously, Russia, who, by the way, has contracts to build, I think, 2 more nuclear plants in this Bashar area, those contracts are alive and well. At the time of these earthquakes last year, Russian scientists came over, and supposedly they were checking out the facility, some rusty bolts and nuts and things of concern, and I think they took those fuel rods out for safekeeping and did whatever they had to do to check out the facility and reloaded them back in, if I understand it right. But it's interesting that the timing of that coincided with those earthquakes. Now, when those earthquakes happened, not only Russia was concerned, but the whole GCC, the Gulf Cooperative Council, which is on the other side of the Gulf. Remember, at its narrowest point in the Persian Gulf, you have the Strait of Hormuz, which is 21 nautical miles. It separates the Arab sides from the Iranian sides. Now, when this happened, they were so concerned about what was going on that they conducted their own studies. And because 2/3 of the world's desalination plants, water is a rare commodity, potable and drinkable water in the Middle East, that 2/3 of the world's desalination plants are over there in that oil-rich, wealthy area. And when this happened, they were very concerned that if there was a nuclear disaster in Bashar, it would contaminate the waters. Those waters would quickly be contaminated over into their drinking sources. Not to mention the radioactive fallout with the wind patterns would be over there before they would get into anywhere in deeper parts of central Iran, because this area is separated by the Zagros Mountains, which are about 150 miles long by 50 miles wide, if I'm not mistaken, at various. And so you could actually get to Kuwait City quicker than you can get to Tehran from this area. So they were very concerned about it, and they conducted a very expensive study. And the outcome of the study was that they are going to build, by 2020, I believe it is, the world's largest pipeline. And we're not talking about a pipeline for oil. We're talking about a pipeline for drinking water that's going to be inland, not dependent upon the Persian Gulf. And that's going to cost them about $10.5 billion. Excuse me. The mountain range is 550 miles long by 150 miles wide. It's huge. It's formidable. And it's one of the reasons throughout time that Elam was always isolated from Persia and that type of thing. Now, just a brief note. Elam dates way back before Persia. You start hearing about Persia around 600 BC. The Persian Empire conquered the Babylonian Empire around 539 BC. So you start hearing about Persia around that time, and it's in the Bible, of course. Daniel mentions it, and Ezekiel mentions Persia. But when you talk about Elam, it predates it by centuries. Elam was a grandson of Noah. And he settled in this area by the Persian Gulf. And we find in Genesis 14, when Abraham went to rescue his nephew Lot during the biblical wars back there, when 5 kings came against 4 kings and Lot got kidnapped and Abraham had to go rescue him, King Chedorlaomer was an Elamite king. So we hear about them way back when. They were warmongers way back about 4,000 years ago. And then we find out in Isaiah 22, and Isaiah wrote between 740 and 701 BC, that the Elamites were expert archers. So they had about 1,500 years between Abraham's time and Isaiah's, about 1,300 years, to perfect their archery craft and their war skills. So when we hear that God is going to break the bow in this prophecy of Elam, he doesn't say bow and knock out the arrows and stuff, which he talks about like in Ezekiel 38, I'll break your bow and knock out your arrows. He talks about breaking the bow of Elam and striking you at the foremost of your might. So when you take and break a bow of an expert archer, he could have a quiver full of arrows, but they won't do him a lot of good because he won't be able to launch them. And it's interesting that Benjamin Netanyahu has lately been arguing on 2 fronts. I'll give you a quote. Prime Minister of Israel, February 25th of 2014, this is in the Jerusalem Post. He's talking with Angela Merkel when she came over, the Chancellor of Germany. She came over to visit Israel. And he says, the goal is to prevent Iran from having the capability to manufacture and deliver nuclear weapons. I believe that means zero enrichment, zero centrifuges, zero plutonium, and, of course, an end to ICBM development, intercontinental ballistic missiles. Because none of these elements, none of them, is necessary for developing new civilian nuclear energy, which is what Iran has claimed that it wants. So what is he suggesting here? The ability to manufacture nuclear weapons and the ability to deliver them. Is Israel perhaps going to try to do something to prevent Iran from launching nuclear weapons? Do they have that capability? Could they launch an EMP? Could they do something? It's believed they could. So I don't know. Is that a prophecy that's relevant to their nuclear program? And what would create such a disaster in this area where the faulty Bushehr nuclear plant is that would lead to exiles that have to go into all the different nations of the world? It seems as though it would be much more than just a revolution, because we have an example of that across the Middle East and Syria, and they're just scattered in the neighboring nations, as I mentioned earlier. So just a couple thoughts about this.
Very interesting. Extremely interesting, folks. And I've got to tell you, anyone who missed, for example, the Pikes Peak conference or the Orlando conference, you're hearing information from Bill Salas that, this is priceless information. This is fantastic, and it's so precise. By the way, Bill, let me ask this from my point of view, and I don't know the answer to this. And I've heard different variations of the answer. Very academic question. Can there be more than one fulfillment of a biblical prophecy?
They can be precursors. There can only be one fulfillment of a biblical prophecy.
Okay.
You could say, like, for instance, I'll give you an example. When you talk about Psalm 83, you have an Arab-Israeli conflict. That appears to be the concluding Arab-Israeli conflict where they come together, they form a devious plan, the Arab countries that share common borders with Israel, and their goal is to form a confederacy to destroy the nation of Israel, that the name of Israel can be remembered no more. And ultimately, in verse 12 of Psalm 83, it says they want to possess the pastures of God for themselves. They want the land. They don't want an Israel. They want to destroy an Israel, and they want to take over the land. And if that finds application today, it sure seems to be happening. In other words, 1948, immediately they go to war. They don't want an Israel, and they want that land for the Arabs of what was once called Palestine. Now we call them, of course, the Palestinian refugees, and that problem has been haunting the world for, since 1948, over 6 decades now. But that was a precursor. That was, for those that have eyes to see, in my estimation, and ears to hear, that was a wake-up call. Get ready. The final act is going to happen. But that was not the full fulfillment of that for a couple of reasons that I explain in my Psalm 83 book. But, that's just one example. You have a prototype of the Antichrist with Antiochus Epiphanes. In the book of Daniel, and of course we find out that Antiochus Epiphanes went into the second Jewish temple and he did an abominable act. And so, he was a prototype or a precursor of what the Antichrist would be like, who will do the same thing, the abomination of desolation that Christ speaks about in Matthew 24 and Daniel mentions in Daniel 9 and elsewhere. So, but even this prophecy in Jeremiah 49 with Elam, you don't really find a precursor. I go through the history, I go through the arguments that are out there, and there aren't many of them, about it already having been fulfilled, and they're really weak, and there's really no good evidence. One, that Iran, the Elamites, have ever been dispersed into all the nations of the world because of a disaster that provoked that. And there's no real proof in the past of Elam fiercely angering the Lord to where he would bring about such a momentous, calamitous judgment. So we have a impending prophecy here. And so then we have to ask ourselves, has Iran fiercely angered the Lord? Because for your listeners that are Christians, they don't worship a violent, randomly acting God who just gets a whim and judges the nation. He's a God of love who sent his Son Jesus Christ to die for our sins, that none would perish, but all who believe in him would have everlasting life. He loves the Iranians. Matter of fact, that's why he's causing dreams and visions and healings and miracles in Iran through his Holy Spirit, and the satellite television is reaching in and penetrating beyond under the noses of the mullahs, and you're having a burgeoning phenomenon of God's love in Christianity over there. But the thing is, if God is fiercely angered, then judgment's forthcome. He's judged Sodom and Gomorrah for, we would say, probably sexual perversion. He judged Nineveh for wickedness. He's judged others for their Pharaoh for trying to destroy the Jews, the Hebrews. So those are three of the main reasons he would normally execute judgment upon a population or a nation. Now, when you talk about is he fiercely angered right now, one, Iran wants to get a nuclear weapon, and they've voiced their opinion. They've called Israel a cancerous tumor that needs to be removed from the region. That's Ayatollah Khomeini. Former President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad said he wants to wipe Israel off the map. Well, God has plans for Israel in the end times. Matter of fact, we're told in Ezekiel 39, verse 7, God is going to uphold his holy name in the midst of his people Israel. This is a prophecy in the latter days, Ezekiel 38 and 39, that the nations shall know he's the Lord, and his name will no longer be profaned, it says. So if God is regathering the Jews into the land, he's been doing that for the last 6 decades, and he's going to use this momentous prophecy in Ezekiel 38 and 39, he's going to defeat these invaders that come against Israel. God is going to do it, not America and not the IDF. And he's going to, in the aftermath, be able to say, I've just upheld my holy name in the midst of my people regathered Israel into the land of Israel, which, of course, the Arabs are trying to take away right now, but that won't happen. Well, if God has plans for Israel and Iran wants to destroy Israel, strike one, that would upset the Lord. Strike two, Iran the social injustice over there is unbelievable. I was telling you a story about, first of all, there was a gal, this was on YouTube, Iranian gal, I don't even know if she was a Christian, but she refused to wear her headdress or hijab. This is just one example of the social intolerance going on over there with mullahs. They're forcing a pagan religion down the throats of the Iranians. And she got thrown in jail for 3 years. 2 years into there, without legal counsel or anything, they broke her leg. During that third year, without giving her medical treatment, they raped her 5 times. Now she comes out of jail, her leg is mangled, and her life is essentially, ruined. She needs Jesus if she doesn't have him already, so she has hope beyond the horizon. Social injustice, you hear about it all over the place. They're throwing these guys in the jail for all types of reasons, especially the women have no rights over there, so to speak, etc. strike two. Strike three, they're persecuting the Christians, executing them, imprisoning them, closing down churches, and in the backdrop of the Lord rolling up his sleeves with his Holy Spirit and bringing many, many people to Christ. I mean, strike three. So I believe that Iran has fiercely angered the Lord, and I believe that that is going to provoke this judgment, and I believe that this judgment is going to take place in Elam, and I believe this judgment is probably going to be nuclear related. It's possible. You know, I don't know. It could be something else, but something has to create a disaster that leads to a humanitarian crisis and a worldwide expulsion of the affected populations. You've already got the people across the coast, and the Arabs, extremely concerned about the very thing I'm talking about. Not that they understand the prophetic aspects, but they're concerned about that nuclear catastrophe that's just waiting to happen there. So now we also have to realize that when this happens, if this happens, it won't totally take Iran out of the prophetic equation, because Iran is in the Ezekiel 38 Gog of Magog invasion listed as Persia. So if,
all right, Bill,
you know, so you can't totally take them out.
Exactly, and you painted a great picture. Hold that thought. We're up against the top of the hour at this point.
Yeah, we'll take the top of the hour break right now, folks. You're listening to the Hagmann Hagmann Report on this. Ladies and gentlemen, hour number 2 of the Hagmann Hagmann Report on this Wednesday, September 10th, 2014, the eve of the anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, both on the World Trade Center and 2 years ago on Benghazi. We are joined by Bill Salas, author of his latest book, Nuclear Showdown in Iran, Revealing the Ancient Prophecy of Elam. And Bill, I'd like to start out with this. I was doing some searches here on Elam in Scripture, and the root word of Elam stems down to the son of Shem, descendants with the country, also 6 Israelites, and then the root word of that is Elam, A-L-A-M, and it says a primitive root word to veil from sight, that is concealed, blind, hide, secret thing. So we're dealing with a prophecy here that not only deals with a nation, but it apparently is used in a word that deals with something that is hidden. Does that fit into what you found in your research?
Well, Elam shows up numerous times in the Bible, mainly the Old Testament. Actually shows up in the Edomites appeared at Pentecost in Acts 2. Lots of the use of the words Elam you'll find back around the time of Esther and Ezra and all that. But a lot of it dealt with the returning Israelis who had the name of Elam, but it wasn't related to what we're dealing with, this prophecy dealing with specific territory of Elam in modern-day Iran. So there might be something there in the root word, but when we look into a word search on Elam in the Bible, we'll find that it shows up more than just territorially. There were actually others named Elam, but that's not uncommon in other prophecies as well. You know, you got Zechariah the prophet. You also had some other Zechariahs running around and things like that as well. So we have to be careful when we study these prophecies to make sure that we're not reading certain verses that apply to an entirely different scenario, different genealogies and things like that. But there's plenty on Elam with respects to the territory we're talking about, the grandson of Noah, the son of Shem, their history, and of course now we see there's a prophecy remaining yet in their future, which we're concerned may be dealing with a nuclear showdown scenario.
Okay. Well, Bill, take us where you want to take us at this point. We've got you for the remaining hour, and thank you for being so generous with your time. We really do appreciate it. So, take us how and where you want to take us with respect to the nuclear showdown looming with Iran and the prophecy of Elam.
Okay, and we'll spend more time on that. Let's take a moment, though, and sort of look at what's going on in the Middle East right now and the concerns about what's next over there. And, you know, things, as you know, since the Arab Spring in 2011 have gotten really bad over there. I mean, nothing in the neighborhood has generally been any good for Israel, of course. You've had revolutions in Syria and all kinds of refugees going in different places. Of course, now you've got Coptic Christians leaving Egypt and Iraq, Christians in Iraq leaving, that have been through Christians through generations because of ISIS. And, everything is really kind of unraveling at the seams. You've had that 50-day conflict going on with Israel and Hamas. It's in a ceasefire up until probably around September 26th, which would be the start of Rosh Hashanah. What's going on? I mean, is there any predictability here? What does anyone do? What international leader has a clue about what's next? We're all interested in watching the news, and the military pundits and political pundits come on, and they'll give us their historical and their geopolitical perspectives. Unfortunately, most of them don't have a biblical perspective, and unfortunately, none of them can do anything really at best from that perspective other than to take some guesses at what they think would be next. And, who would have thought ISIS would be dominating the news, when we were in early 2013? Back then you had John Kerry trying to jumpstart peace talks with the Palestinians and the Jews, and that process was interrupted in July with the, I think it was the third revolution in Egypt where Mohammed Morsi got deposed, and then you go on in August, his attempts to rekindle peace talks were interrupted by the Syrian chemical weapons that came out. And then, of course, the rest of the year was sort of dominated with Iran's nuclear program. And now we've got John Kerry trying to come back and build a coalition. That's currently what's going on as we speak, to try to deal with ISIS. And so he's going to the Arabs in Jordan and Saudi Arabia and generally appealing toward the Arab League to get involved to help stomp out ISIS. And it's the same Arab League that doesn't recognize Israel's right to exist. And they are about to, in the same breath, try to help the Palestinians go to the United Nations in full support of trying to get Israel to give up the land they acquired in 1967. Again, what do they want? They want the land of Israel. That's sort of that theme of Psalm 83. Let us take for ourselves the possession of God for pastures of God for our possession, is how it reads. And then you got these other unholy alliances going on with Iran, and America is in talks with Iran about their nuclear program, and yet you hear these rumors about Iran is going to support America's attempt to stomp out ISIS. And it's like, okay, well, on the one hand, we're trying to negotiate with Iran because we don't like their nuclear program, and on the other hand, we're strange bedfellows, possibly, with them because they don't like ISIS either. It's kind of like, imagine this in the neighborhood. This is the Middle East scenario in your neighborhood. You live in one house, and next door you got this guy, and he wants to blow up your house. He wants to destroy you, your wife, and your children. And he's trying to build an arsenal to do that. And he's got plans on the table, and he's calculating how he's going to do that. But meanwhile, across the street, you got this crazy guy moving in, and that guy wants to molest your children and your neighbor's children, and bring harm to his wife and household and all that sort of thing. So all of a sudden, the two guys next to each other, and one guy wants to destroy the other guy's house, all of a sudden they start talking to each other, going, we got a problem across the street. It's like, forgive me, you got a problem everywhere around you. And this example is Israel. They got a problem everywhere around them, as does America. Because we're supposed to be involved in helping in this process. And so we have these unholy alliances formed. Another crazy example of what's going on in the absurdity is the P5+1 that's negotiating with Iran about their nuclear program. It consists of the United States, Britain, France, Russia, China, and Germany. Well, Russia has got contracts with Iran to build 2 more nuclear sites, and yet they're going to be involved in negotiating with Iran's nuclear program. China is, I believe, the number 2 importer of oil. They need oil. They need Iranian oil. And, so talk about throwing a couple foxes in the hen house. I mean, this is a really, really turbulent and volatile situation. So what does it all mean when you step outside from the forest, from the trees, and try to take a look at what's going on over there? Well, one is no world leader has a clue about what's going on. I mean, I'm sorry. I don't put my faith in any of these guys because they're making unholy alliances left and right, and they don't know what they're doing, and they're dealing with some really big potential issues over there. We're talking about weapons of mass destruction. We're talking about people that want to wipe Israel off the map and that sort of thing. And they think they've got it, and it's dominating the news, and it's going to dominate the news because Israel's a big deal in the end times. So, of course, well, when it's all said and done, then what is God up to? You know, it doesn't really matter who Kerry's going to try to negotiate with to try to bring resolve to these things. And it always goes back to give Israel's enemies concessions, throw money at the problem, give them land, you know, and that sort of thing. And we'll cover your back, Israel. And, you know, with friends like us, Israel, who needs enemies, right? But so the thing is, what I try to do is continue to point to the Bible. We know certain things are forthcoming, biblical predictions that are slated to happen that are for our time because God loves us, has advanced knowledge because he's not a God with too much time on his hands. He's the God that holds all time in his hands, and he knows the end from the beginning, and only he knows the end from the beginning. He says that in Isaiah 46. And he gives us this prophetic information to have an understanding, a schematic of what's going on in our world, not because he's trying to impress us. I mean, God doesn't need to impress us. He's trying to inform us because he loves us. And so now we can have a clue about what the road ahead, what lies ahead on the road, and try to bring this biblical perspective into the discussion because, unfortunately, even your best news channels, they aren't necessarily giving you the biblical perspective. They're giving the world and the geopolitical perspective and the historical perspective. And so what do we see going on when we step back? We see that many people in treacherous, repressive situations, especially in the Middle East, it's also happening in China and elsewhere, are coming to know Jesus Christ. I mean, by multitudes. It's like a final outpouring of dreams and visions and miracles and healings coming out. The Lord is pouring his Spirit out on humanity in many places, especially those most repressed. That's why Iran is the number one growing evangelical population in the world. But you know what? It's moving over into Syria, too. Those Syrian refugees many of them are getting Bibles for the first time, and they're so disenfranchised and disillusioned and disenchanted with what's going on in Syria. They have no future or any hope anymore. For the most part, they're seeing their whole country in shambles now. Chemical weapons came out last year. Now there's reports of chlorine gas have been used in northern parts of Syria, and they're coming to know Jesus Christ. And you've got a lot of Christians coming under severe persecution. Beheadings going on in Iraq with ISIS and things like that. And I'm going to dovetail off for a second and just tell you a thought on that, and then I'll come back into my monologue here, is that, when I speak at churches, I tell people, I say, look, that ISIS over there, they've captured some swaths in northern Syria and northern Iraq. As a matter of fact, if you study Psalm 83, when Asaph wrote Psalm 83 and incorporated Assyria in the lineup of Israel, the belligerents that want to come against Israel in that confederacy, when Asaph wrote 3,000 years ago, what you see ISIS occupying pretty much comprised a lot of what Assyria looked like in his generation. And make the distinction that when Isaiah wrote, 200-300 years later, in 740 to 701 BC, the Assyria that Isaiah wrote about encompassed pretty much modern day Syria, including Damascus and things like that, because the Assyrians took over that area in 732 BC. But it didn't necessarily cover all of Syria during Asaph's time. So what you see right now is a possible picture of the Assyria Asaph was talking about 3,000 years ago in Psalm 83, and they're on the grow. They're trying to take over more land. And in their sights, there's concerns that they want to take over Jordan. And Jordan is in Psalm 83, and it says in Psalm 83, verse 8, that Assyria, if that's got anything to do with ISIS, and I'm not saying for sure that it does, it says that Assyria joins with or enjoins Jordan, and it says it helps the children of Lot, which would be Jordan. Now, in the Psalm 83 lineup, Jordan is the weakest army by far when you throw in Hezbollah's firepower into Lebanon, and their Jordanian army is really mainly to defend the Hashemite kingdom. They're not really a very big army and strong army, so they could, at some point, they could be taken over, and maybe that's being said, I don't know, but at the same token, what would happen if Jordan was taken over by ISIS? They would potentially now control the Temple Mount, because when Israel took over Jerusalem in 1967, they foolishly offered to the Waqf, WAQF, of Jordan to control the Temple Mount area. So that's an interesting thing to say. But getting back to my story, I tell these people at the churches, that Assyria is what Jonah was told, to go to the king of Assyria and tell him that God's going to judge Assyria if they don't repent. And what did Jonah do? And at the time, that Assyria that Jonah was to go to, around Nineveh and things like that in Iraq, was as barbaric, if not worse, than this ISIS beheadings and all that. Matter of fact, they were known for their barbaric activity, and they would, as I understand it, they would have decapitated heads sitting on spears and stuff, so when people walk by, they realize we don't want anything to do with them. This is what they do to their enemies. So what did Jonah do? Well, he hopped on a ship and went in the other direction, because he didn't particularly want to go into an area where maybe there was beheadings and barbaric activity going on. Of course, he was swallowed up by a whale, and we know the story. He ultimately realized he had to go there and face the music and do what God wanted. And sure enough, the Syrians at that time repented, and their judgment was delayed until the time of Nahum. But so I look at these people in the churches and I say, look, you're hearing all this bad news, the beheadings and all that. What if God came up to one of you and said, I want you, modern day Jonah, to go into northern Iraq and speak to the Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, and tell him that God's about to judge you guys because you're cursing Israel, you're doing all kinds of problems, you're killing Christians, you're killing anybody that's not worshiping your fundamentalist Islamic beliefs, and you're going to be judged and destroyed as an entity. And everyone in the church starts nodding no thanks. But, we're dealing with the most bizarre scenario out there right now, and I'm kind of forgetting where my monologue was going, but in the end analysis, but the only hope and understanding of what's going on is the biblical perspective, because the world and geopolitical perspectives are utterly absurd. Unholy alliances being formed left and right. America's in the center of that sad mix without the decisiveness and understanding they need to have.
Fantastic, Bill. I mean, that's a fantastic analysis. The entire ISIS topic of ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, to me was a creation or a direct, a creation of Western intelligence, specifically the United States. I mean, when I say creation, we did nothing to stop it, but I think that plays in a very important role into current day events and the formation of this caliphate, the borderless nations, the restructuring of borders, all of this. So who would have thought really 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, or even a year ago, who would have thought about ISIS as being such a formidable foe, and what they've done, the advances they've made here in the short term. I think that's prophetic in and of itself.
Well, right, and the verdict's not out on them, just like the verdict isn't out on a whole lot of things over there. For instance, everyone thought Mohammed Morsi was going to be a big deal. As a matter of fact, Time magazine at the end of 2012 did a cover on him as the most important man in the Middle East, I believe the caption was. Of course, now he's deposed in July, and I think he's still in jail. When you look at what happened, we're talking about the uncertainties of the Middle East. You talk about who would have thought ISIS would have been dominating the news now to a point now where Kerry's now, with all of his other failed Middle East foreign policies, running over there trying to put together these unholy alliances with the Arabs and stuff like that don't like Israel. We're supposed to be Israel's best friend. And, everybody's just running around with like a chicken with their head cut off, trying to figure out what to do next. Who's going to be dominating next? Is it going to be a ballistic scenario with Iran's nuclear program, which frankly I think we need to be watching for. My contacts that I feel comfortable with are pretty convinced that Israel is going to strike Iran's nuclear program. It's just a matter of time and layout and that sort of thing. But what's next? Well, when we woke up in January of 2011, Arab Spring was going crazy in North Africa and on through Egypt and Tunisia on into the greater parts of the Middle East. It was like wildfire springing up all over as the youth bulge, driven by social networks of YouTube and Twitter and Facebook, etc., were screaming to cry out from 7th century Islam and state-censored media. And we all thought, the liberal pundits anyways over here in the West, well, they're just looking for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is a good thing. But no one was really expecting that to happen. It just happened like a wildfire. And we've seen that, Syrian revolution later, and now we're on the third Egyptian president. Hagmann Mubarak was the president for over 30 years. But in the last 3 years, we've had 3 presidents, Mubarak, Morsi, and Sisi, and the verdict is not out on al-Sisi. So he's a general, he's gotten the power through a military coup for all intents and purposes. So everything is like shifting sand in the Middle East right now. And so when we talk about, what's really going on over there, stepping outside, it says in Daniel 2, verses 20 and 21, that it's the Lord who changes times and seasons and removes and raises kings and gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those with understanding. And we are seeing the most unbelievable season of change going on in pretty much the history of the Middle East. And we're seeing the removal and lifting up of different leaders in all these different places. And they're shifting and they're changing, and some are being killed and destroyed, like a lot of the Hamas leaders and some of these ISIS leaders now, and, the Egyptian presidents we talk about and this sort of thing. But when you look at who's been removed versus who remains, you'll generally be able to assess that those that removed were probably not those who would go against Israel in a war, like Gaddafi or Bedin Ali of Tunisia or Mubarak of Egypt, etc. I mean, they weren't the best apples on the tree, but Mubarak maintained a peace with Israel for a long time. But you look at who's left behind and in power. Hassan Nasrallah of Hezbollah, Secretary General of Hezbollah in Lebanon. Bashar Assad still hanging on with power in Syria, and Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran, and now this Baghdadi of ISIS, and Sisi, who he's not really a fan of Israel's. The verdict's not out on him yet. And, apart from King Abdullah of Jordan, and by the way, Jordan won't recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. None of the members of the Arab League will. And that wasn't germane to their peace with Israel, that Jimmy Carter, that Bill Clinton forged in the 1990s, because it had nothing to do with Jordanians wanting to get land from Israel, and as much as the Palestinians, won't recognize Israel as a Jewish state because they want to go into Israel and they want to call it Palestine. So anyway, we're just looking at this mess, guys. And as far as I'm concerned, I think the wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those with understanding is that God's enduring, long-suffering mercy, which leads men to repentance, has been extended for over 6 decades since the rebirth of the nation of Israel. And the international community has had the opportunity to try to restore order and peace in that Middle East area. And they've been unsuccessful. And now Israel's enemies are armed and dangerous to the teeth. And Israel knows it. And Israel is strong, and they will fight for their own survival. And the thing that has come out of the Arab Spring, of these last 3.5, 4 years, is that Israel has become united in many ways. They understand that if they're going to survive, they're going to have to pretty much take matters into their own hands. And I think this period of time where you can try to talk peace, try to shovel some of the promised land into Arab coffers, try to, little incursions and conflicts between Israel and Gaza and Hamas, crosstown military rivalries. I think those days are rapidly coming to an end. And I think what you're going to start seeing is weapons of mass destruction entering into the Middle East theater and world-changing events that lead to biblical prophecies being fulfilled. And that will affect everybody.
Tomorrow, it'll be 13 years since the towers came down and the plane went down in Pennsylvania and the Pentagon was struck. Could you have predicted, 13 years ago, would you have said, my goodness, this is where we'll likely be, in 13 years and just a little over a decade? I mean, could you have, just based on geopolitical events at the time, or even, we'll say even a year after 9/11, could you have predicted this, or when I say predicted this, foresaw this from just merely a geopolitical point of view?
Well, you asking me personally, I would say probably yes, because I've been studying these related prophecies for quite some time. Could I say I would have been able to predict how out of control it is with ISIS and all these types of things? Those are, I just don't know that those details are discoverable biblically. We get the bigger pictures of things going on. What caught my attention with the towers coming down was it caught everybody off guard, including the church. And, they needed to do their homework. And the best answers I heard as pastors would flock to the area and try to tend to the affected. And there was, the day after 9/11, that Sunday afterwards, the churches were filled, right? I mean, that was short-lived, but, people wanted answers, and they wanted whatever answers they could sink their teeth into, especially if they had biblical answers. I mean, there were people wondering if this was Armageddon, right? The best thing I heard was Pastor Chuck Smith, who's since gone to be with the Lord from Calvary Chapels, that, you got to keep your eye on the Middle East, the greater Middle East, especially this Ezekiel 38, Gog and Magog, Russian, Iranian, Turkey-led invasion coming into Israel. And I said, well, thank you, Chuck. Someone is finally putting some identity onto what's going on. But I kind of thought down deep, and no disrespect to Pastor Chuck, who was a wonderful man, was that that's not really about Russia and Turkey and Iran and Ezekiel 38. This is about the Arab-Israeli conflict. And terrorism is the ugly byproduct of that Arab-Israeli conflict. And it was problematic in the Middle East as Palestinians would, blow up pizza parlors and suicide bombers and buses. But the world had a deaf ear foreign policy. And as long as it stayed in that area and didn't come into our backyard internationally, it's just sad, but that's the way it goes. Well, since then, of course, the towers came down and the trains were taken out in Madrid and the London bus bombings, and, it's going to get, now the world's involved in terrorism. And so, I think at this point, it's really a matter of when is God's mercy, which endures forever, and long-suffering going to continue to turn the other cheek on what's going on over there in the Middle East and in the world in general, and in America. There's very much concerns about what's going on with America's decline right now. And I think we need to keep our focus more on God's time clock, and that's sort of the centerpiece of that is Israel, than we do on, the razzle-dazzle and the political spin coming out from the news networks and, the Obama administration and things like that. And even no matter what your position is on the Obama administration or whatever, even if you had a staunch conservative that everyone loved and stuff, I still think he would have his hands full, because now at this point things are so out of control. The only hero in this mix is going to be Jesus Christ. And so, certainly we pray for this country, and we pray we get good leadership with these November elections, and we can try to bring resolve and try to restore this country and take it back to its heritages, which many people believe is wishful thinking at this point. But I'm very concerned that at this point, the plug is out of the pool, or get out of the pool time, and there's going to be some fireworks going on.
You know, as I read your book, and folks, we're talking with Bill Salas, author of Nuclear Showdown in Iran. And in fact, it's a great trilogy of books, Israelistine, Psalm 83, and of course now Nuclear Showdown in Iran. I would recommend each book. As I was reading through this, I was looking at the different headlines. I was looking at taking a lot of notes. And like I said, if I was in a courtroom with you, and if you would introduce this into evidence, introduce this book into evidence as, hey, we are facing a historical fulfillment of prophetic of prophecies, 2,000-year-old prophecies, I would have to say, I'd be hoping the jury would be packed with people sympathetic to my side, because the facts in this book are so well put together. I have a question here from a listener that was sent to me by email. Does this nuclear showdown in Iran, the prophecy of Elam, how does that affect your Psalm 83 war, if it does? In other words, does it adjust the time clock or adjust the series of events?
Well, that's a great question, and one that I've pondered intently. I think there are several imminent events, and those would be the rapture, the nuclear showdown in Iran, potentially nuclear, with this Elam prophecy, and Psalm 83. The destruction of Damascus could be. Isaiah 19, this scenario in Egypt, verses 1 through 18. These things, I believe, are in play. Which one will sequence what? And this is where it gets difficult. There are certain other things like Ezekiel 38, the tribulation period, the Antichrist, things like that there are preconditions, I believe, before they can actually be fulfilled, and therefore they're not imminent. So when we look at what's imminent right now, I listed those, and in my estimation, and we want to be careful just because Iran's nuclear program's in the news. Of course, so is everything else with Hamas and Israel preparing to fight Hezbollah and things like that, and ISIS. All of these things are in play. And Putin, even though Ezekiel 38, I think, is still off a little bit, he's high and mighty now, taking over Crimea in March in the span of about a week, which is 5 times the size of the West Bank and Judea and Samaria, which the Palestinians have been trying to get control over for over 6 decades. Well, Russia has no problem taking over 5 times that much land in this past March in Crimea. And Russia represents, so Putin, he may not be the Gog character, Gog of Magog, but Russia's building up momentum now too. So all these end time signs are converging. Now, to answer this listener's question or emailer's question, I personally think it's possible that the next prophetic event to find fulfillment, setting the rapture aside because we don't know exactly when that'll happen, would be this prophecy on Elam. And Israel cannot chase that nuclear can down the road much longer. Benjamin Netanyahu has been warning about their number one concern, Israel's existential threat, since 2005 when Bush was president, since at least 2005. And that's, of course, the time when Ahmadinejad said that he wanted to wipe Israel off the map, the former Iranian president. I think that it's very possible, and I'll give you a story I heard from an Israeli diplomat that compares it to a scenario that Menachem Begin had to go through with Iraq. But I think it's possible that Israel strikes Iran, and that opens up Pandora's box in the Middle East. And the threats Iran has made come to fruition. They try to strike Israel, and they try to get their proxies to strike Israel. Their proxies are degraded somewhat now. Syria, Hamas, Hezbollah is not degraded. They're definitely dangerous and strong right now. But you start having hundreds of missiles going to Israel daily from different areas. The nuclear weapon is going to go off. I mean, they cannot handle that. Their defense systems are not going to be able to deal with that. And then you might see Damascus being nuked. And I'm not saying this is how this is going to lay out to your listeners, but if Damascus went up in smoke,
And fortunately for a lot of Syrians right now, they're no longer in Damascus. They don't necessarily want to be living in squalor and refugee camps, but when they see their hometown up in a mushroom cloud, and they had the opportunity to get out of it, and many of them come to Christ, meanwhile, many of them, of course, probably now familiar with Isaiah 17, the destruction of Damascus, they'll be, clicking their heels in the air, going, wow. Those that still have heels, many of those people have been maimed and hurt and stuff. But so then you got the Arab League going, whoa, let's set aside our Sunni and Shiite schisms and let's have a meeting, because does this mean, Beirut's next or Cairo's next or, what? We have to do something now. So, all these things are very possible. And, how will America sit on the sidelines and not be affected by these kinds of things? I mean, it's just not probable.
No, it's not at all. It's not. And I know our time with you is growing short here. I've got to ask a question that was on my mind here that is kind of totally out of left field from what we're talking about. Well, maybe not. I don't know if I have asked you this question before, but something has been bothering me, and I've been trying to get answers on this, and frankly, I've not been able to get any definitive answers or any solid Christian views that are not anti-Semitic in nature. Okay, that said, I'm referring to an event, a very historic event that took place in Jerusalem back in January of 2008, when George Bush arrived in Jerusalem. It was, I think, January 9th, 2008. Met with the Israeli Prime Minister Olmert, along with former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. They were taken to, reportedly, to Zechariah's cave. I think that part I'm not sure about. But what has been reported was that, again, if I'm totally off base here, Bill, I want you to tell me I'm off base, but what's been reported by various media sources is during that visit, 3 pretty significant rabbis, rabbinical teachers, presented George W. Bush with a scroll, parchment signed by, again, 3 prominent rabbinical teachers, the most prominent on the planet. And it was called the Scroll of Bush, and it referred to him as the Honorable Mr. George W. Bush, President of the United States of America, and then it said something to the effect of Mr. George W. Bush, the Chief Prince of Meshach and Tubal, and then Ezekiel 38, verse 1, leader of the West. Have you heard about this at all? And if so, what's this all about?
Well, I haven't heard about it, unfortunately, so I don't know that really qualifies me to give you the answer you're looking for, but I will tell you this. Most scholars would suggest that that's impossible for us to think that an American is going to be, the Gog of Magog or the Meshach of Tubal and things like that. When you look at the history, and that takes us into primarily Ezekiel 38 and 39. Meshach and Tubal, they settled in the area which would commonly be Turkey. So we would think when they're mentioned in Ezekiel 38 verses 1 through 3, that's incorporating Turkey alongside of Magog, and it says Gog of Magog. And then we find out later in Ezekiel 38, if you follow Magog, you find a trail of the Scythians, and they started heading up into the breakaway areas of the southern steppes of Russia. And ultimately it says this coalition is going to be invaded from the uttermost parts of the northernmost parts, and on the map that would take you up toward, of course, Russia. So your general teachings are pretty solid and fairly well researched, and that would put Russia involved and Turkey involved. And those are the main populations listed in the first few verses. Then you get some honorable mentions of these other guys, which I find interesting, in around verse 5, where you've got Cush and Put and Persia. And, Persia would be Iran, which I find interesting. Why aren't they listed in the first few verses with Russia and Turkey? and I think it's interesting now that we talk about Elam, is Iran degraded by the time of Ezekiel 38 and 39? Are they a less formidable army because of maybe a strike on Elam and their nuclear program, if that's what's being in that prophecy in Jeremiah 49? But, Put and Cush, Put would be around Libya and some of the northern African areas, maybe Tunisia and Morocco areas, and then Cush would take you down to the west, eastern, central area of North Africa, maybe down through lower Egypt and Somalia and Sudan and things like that, Ethiopia maybe. So I just don't see America in that mix at all. So from my perspective, I wouldn't add much credibility to that story.
Okay, good, because when I read that, I was grabbing your book and Israelstein, and as well as Psalm 83, and I'm thinking, okay, this is not fitting anywhere, and but I had to ask because I thought it was a rather interesting, if not anecdotal, story. And just to close this out, I mean, you get into in your book the overview of course, as we were talking about the Ezekiel 38-39 prophecy, Putin to fulfill the Bible prophecy with Ukraine actions. It's interesting because you wrote a novel, I suspect, or I suppose you would call it Revelation Road, Hope Beyond the Horizon. And it's interesting because you point to the possibility that the Magog coalition is strategically assembled, or is strategically assembled by Russia, and certain countries also coalesce perhaps for one or more reasons, and you list different reasons, but the Ukraine situation right now, how does that fit into the larger geopolitical, what we're talking about here, the situation that we're talking about?
Okay, and by the way, before I answer that, I do want to caveat something I just said in my last answer. I do believe America might be found in Ezekiel 38 and 39, just not under the enemies of Israel. There's this other, you've got 9 populations of enemies listed. You've got Israel, so you've got a 10th population. And then you've got 4 other populations listed in Ezekiel 38. And those are Sheba, Dedan, which Sheba would be Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Dedan would be Saudi Arabia. Then you got the merchants of Tarshish, a theme of commerce. Someone wants to have commerce with Israel, with that wealthy Israel. And they're young lions. And I believe that probably the only place you'll find America in the Bible, which is troubling, the greatest superpower that ever lived, is as the young lions of Tarshish. And I argue in my Psalm 83 book as to why the merchants of Tarshish would probably be the UK. The 2 primary theories are it's either Spain and the colonies that came out of that through Central America and Southern America, or it's the UK and the Western colonies, of course, of which America would be. And I get into arguments for that and stuff like that as to why I believe they're there. But just so that said, I don't want your listeners to think that I don't believe America has got a very important role in Ezekiel 38, but we're not fighting Israel against Israel with the belligerents, but nor are we seeming to help Israel, other than we're standing on the sidelines, and these protesters, Sheba, Dedan, merchants, Tarshish, and the young lions are going, what are you doing, Russia and your coalition? Are you coming for this great plunder and booty that Israel's in possession of? And why are we sideline, spectators instead of actively, helping Israel? And it turns out that God is the one that stops that formidable advance against Israel with earthquake, fire, hailstone, and brimstones. And it's not America, and it's not the IDF. So with that said, Russia's on the move right now. Vladimir Putin is raised up in the ranks of the KGB. He basically, his comments were the greatest tragedy of the 20th century was the breakup of the Soviet Empire, and the greatest triumph of the 21st century will be the restoration of the Soviet Empire. And we need to take that seriously. Russia is one of the top producers of oil. I think they recently surpassed Saudi Arabia as the top producer. Now there's debate as to whether they're maintaining that ranking. They've got serious contracts with Europe for natural gas, the Ukraine. They supply all kinds of natural gas into the Ukraine. They produce 10.2 million gallons of oil per day, which is about 12% of the world's daily needs, which is about 89 million per day. 25% of the natural gas of Europe is provided by Russia and goes through the Ukraine. About 80% of the gas lines go through there. And Ukraine is 100% dependent on Russia for their natural gas. So Russia is really, at this point in time, Ukraine is a pivotal place for them economically to continue to grow, because Russia is growing in a multi-front capacity, economically and militarily. They're, again, building their arsenal. They've still got about 8,500 nuclear weapons compared to us. We think we've got about 7,700. France would be the nearest other one with about 300. And so, it wouldn't surprise me to see them to try to continue to take over the Ukraine, who did not get involved in NATO, as they should have. But now NATO is concerned about what could happen to the Ukraine, and then Russia expanding into the NATO alliance. So, Russia may sort of meet some resistance as they try to take over the Ukraine. I wouldn't be surprised if they do want to take over the Ukraine and move toward that end, and they probably wouldn't have much trouble doing that unless the West opposes that and NATO opposes that. But the larger issue, I think, is that if they do start to butt heads in the Ukraine with the Western powers, they then start to move towards mobilizing and taking back parts of the Soviet Empire that were in the breakaway republics in the southern steppes of Russia, which those places appear to be in Ezekiel 38 when you follow the path of Magog and the Scythians and things like that. So how far he will go toward taking over Ukraine, it's possible he'll keep moving in that direction, but if he starts running into roadblocks, it would not surprise me to see him leveraging more power, or Russia in general leveraging more power to the south of Russia, and that would fit into Ezekiel 38 as well.
Gotcha. And that makes perfect sense. Folks, you've got to, in my view, in my estimation anyway, you've got to take a couple of steps back and look at the entire, the larger picture, the geopolitical picture in, what's taking place to really understand, for example, what is taking place in the Middle East. Bill, I want to thank you so much for being just a tremendous guest and writing a tremendous book. Again, folks, the book that Bill Salas has written and is now published, available, is Nuclear Showdown in Iran. I highly recommend this book. It's revealing the ancient prophecy of Elam. It's a very, very solid read, and Mr. Salas was very careful not to make any leaps in logic as others might do or tend to do, and I respect him for that. He lays it all out in a very factual manner, and it was a book that I read through quickly once and then read again, taking notes. I'm going to tell you, a fantastic book, and it really. I look at your book, Psalm 83, Israelistine, and this book is like a trilogy that all fit together, and a very good biblical work in biblical eschatology. So I just want to say thank you so much for that. In the last 2 minutes that we've got left before the top of the hour, anything that we might have missed that you want to drive home?
No, I always like to close with the fact that in these unpredictable times, we need to understand that we can have understanding and hope and comfort in what the Word of God says, and that, of course, is that Jesus Christ loves us, He's our Savior, He is returning, and He will remedy all these problems. And the Christ-rejecting world, even though God is a loving God and His mercies endure forever, it will be judged. And the opportunity is right now to accept Jesus Christ as your Savior, because things are about to explode. And you want to be walking with the Lord and receiving the Lord as your Savior to get through these troubling times. And I would encourage all your listeners to seriously take that journey and make that step even now, because today is the day of their salvation. But if they want to inquire and do their diligent research, they need to do it with ultimate priority at this point in time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't have said it any better myself. Mr. Bill Salas, we really appreciate it. His website is, I'm sorry, Bill. I just lost my page.
Depot Ministries.
Thank you.
Plus prophecydepot.com, like Home Depot. Prophecydepot.com is the best one.
Right, okay. And as a matter of fact, I typed in Prophecy Depot Ministries, but it does go to prophecydepot.com. Okay, Prophecy. Gotcha. All right, beautiful. Bill, thanks so much. God bless you. You have a great night, and thank you for bearing with us through all of these communication issues. We do have some pretty terrific storms here, cartoonish like lightning that's outside of our studio window, so I don't know if that had anything to do with it. So, but again, thank you so much for your time tonight, sir.
All right, thank you guys very much.
All right.
Thanks, Bill.
And folks, you can go to Hagmann@Hagmann.com. The link there to Bill's website is on the left, and of course, under the photos, if you go to the Orlando, Florida conference, you can see how what a good-looking guy Bill Salas is, and standing under the poster of Psalm 83, and of course the blue dots are over Joe's and my face, and just kidding, folks. But seriously, Joe, we really did have a good time talking to him down there and getting to know Bill.
Yeah, need to do more of those meet and greets, and especially with what we're seeing in the world today. We don't know how much time we'll have left to be able to have the freedoms of travel and gathering that we do now.
In preparation for tonight's program, I was thinking too. I know it's not not necessarily their what would you call it? Their charge to do so, or within their purview. But I often wonder if, for example, some so-called conservative Christian talk show hosts, if they, we'll take Sean Hannity for example. How do they view world events? Or why isn't there more of a biblical perspective? I suppose that's kind of a rhetorical question. Why isn't there more of a biblical perspective that's being offered today? Because isn't what we're seeing today, when you can go back nearly 2,000 years ago, to Ezekiel, to Jeremiah, for example, and read a prophecy that appears to fit to a T what's taking place today, and they say appears to fit this. Why wouldn't that come up in conversation? Are they not allowed to?
Well, they can't point people in the true direction of the truth, so they do everything they can to make excuses and talking points around that real truth.
And you know what? This is why we do our program, because for experts like Bill and others to come on and say, look, this is what's taking place. This is what was predicted, what was prophesied. I'm sorry for using the word predicted, but prophesied in the Bible. To me, this is the real news. And when you look at this, how everything is being set up. And again, I look at ISIS. Look at how I hesitate to use the word perfect, but what a perfect fit ISIS is for this entire end time scenario. What a perfect fit all of these other puzzle pieces are for this end time scenario as prophesied in the Bible. So just something I was thinking about for the preparation for the show tonight. And in addition to that, all of the occult numerology symbolism that we're seeing and so on.
Just a quick scheduling notes here. Tomorrow we will be on a few different radio shows before having our own. We'll be with Josh Tully tomorrow from 10 to noon Eastern Time, and then we'll be on Pastor Paul Begley's show at 1 o'clock tomorrow Eastern Time. So that's the Josh Tully show from 10 to noon, and then an hour after that we will be on with Pastor Paul Begley for those who are available who want to listen in. Make sure
I'm going to take the gloves off tomorrow. I'm taking the gloves off tomorrow.
With that, we're going to go to our top of the hour break. We'll be right back after these short messages. You're listening to the Hagmann Hagmann Report on this September 10th, 2014, a Wednesday. We're going to come back on the other side with some news.
Doing a program September 10th, 2001. Would we have gotten it right? Would we have, and I think about this as well, would we have been in the ballpark? Would we have, in the run-up to that particular episode, would we have got things right, facts right? And I look at where we're at today, the threat level. And by the way, folks, Barack Hussein Obama, there was a presidential address on the Islamic State threat this evening where he addressed the nation. Okay, I really, truly believe, and this was on the studio monitors here, I really believe that Obama, I believe that the people around him, which are, don't forget, he's got many, many Muslim Brotherhood connections, much to the consternation of Media Matters for America. He's got, plus he also, if you don't forget, 2 years ago tomorrow, the fatal attack at the, can I say embassy at Benghazi? Yeah, right. Consulate? No, that's not it. Oh, yeah, the CIA headquarters in Benghazi. Again, a very sore subject for Media Matters for America. They apparently just don't quite understand that the nation building that is taking place by the renegade in chief, his former Secretary of State, the Muslim in chief as far as the Central Intelligence Agency is concerned, and other government entities. Media Matters for America, the writers there, they're too busy bootlicking the messiahs, their messiahs' boots with respect to the events. And you know, it's sad because this is not necessarily just about 2 years ago Benghazi. This is not just about 4 dead Americans. This is about the millions of refugees out of Syria, refugees that would not ordinarily be created or have that status had it not been for, and can not continue to be for, the CIA / Department of State / Muslim Brotherhood agenda, the Saudi agenda, the Qatari agenda that is taking place across the Middle East, using our military hardware and the blood of our men and women in uniform, as well as the blood of our intelligence assets there as well, including the UK and even Israel is involved in this. So there are no hands that are free of blood stains. I will say that without any doubt. But I do believe, as we sit, Joe, right here on the eve of 9/11, I believe that there is something that will happen, is about to happen. I don't know what that it is. It's not necessarily confined to the anniversary date of 9/11, but whether it's a week, a month, 2 months, I don't know. But I do believe that we're looking at a very, very dangerous time in our existence. And by dangerous, I'm meaning well beyond, exponentially worse than the events of 9/11/2001 right here in America. Those borders are open for, the southern border is open for a reason. The missing nukes, do you remember those? Have they been accounted for? What about the Ebola outbreak? Now Steve Quayle has been on talking about that and saying that this is kind of a beta test precursor for something much bigger, and I tend to agree with him on that. But look at all of the different threats that are facing this country. And I'm just going to close my thoughts out by saying this. in my view, we could have, the people of this country could have made a difference in 2007 and 2008. The people who laughed, scoffed, mocked, ridiculed, and vilified citizens, talking about the pedigree of Barack Hussein Obama, the identity of Barack Hussein Obama / Barry Soetoro. Anybody who mocked or ridiculed or vilified or said, oh, it's a distraction from the real issues. The reason, in my view, a very significant reason we are in the position we're in today, the threat environment that we're in today, the world crisis that we're in today. We can look at the globe and put your finger on a country or a continent, whatever, and tell me if there are not fires, burning out of control, metaphorically speaking. Even in America, the undercurrent of crisis is here. The economic crisis is looming large. The taking out of the U.S. dollar, the deliberate killing of the U.S. dollar. But look at the carnage that we caused in Libya. We, the United States, the Western, in tandem with the countries I've mentioned. Look at what we've caused. Look at the refugee status we've caused in Syria. A ragtag group of anti-Assad rebels. It would have been much like the Bay of Pigs back in the early 1960s if Obama and Clinton would have acted like Kennedy and Kennedy. You see that parallel there? Of course you do. But no, you've got the renegade in chief whose agenda is Islamic. You've got the CIA chief, now the head of the entire CIA, who, according to an FBI agent, converted to Islam, or did convert to Islam quite some time ago. And even if the conversion, even if that is, it can't be proved, by their fruits you shall know them. Certainly the CIA, the Western intelligence agencies combined, are doing the bidding for Saudi Arabia, for the Saudis, for the Qataris. One of the things, and I'll, for real now, I'll close with this, Joe. On this second anniversary of Benghazi, everyone wants to talk, for example, about the security, the failures of diplomatic security. No one wants to talk about the 5 warehouses spread across North Africa and Benghazi and Misrata and Derna that are Saudi-owned and Qatari-owned or controlled, British-controlled. We knew about them, and we had our hand in that as well. No one wants to talk about the 2 major ships, the El Intisar, as well as the other one, begins with an L, I can't think of it right now at the moment, that were running tons and tons and tons and tons of weapons out of Libya, out of North Africa, out of Derna, or out of North Africa into Syria. Well, via Turkey, that is. Isn't it funny how Media Matters, all they want to talk about, diplomatic security failures, which is a red herring. And when I say that, it goes to us, our side, so to speak, the conservative Christian, the people who are supposed to know and want to get to the truth of the matter. We're not even many of us are not even bringing this up, about the real agenda in the Middle East, about the real agenda of the Arab Spring, about the real agenda with Libya, about the real agenda in Syria, and the proxy war that we're fighting against Russia that will soon could soon turn to, can I talk? I can't talk. May very well soon. Look at a strike against our economy. How's that? Let me just stop talking here and just say, wouldn't it be interesting, as Bill Salas had even mentioned, what would happen if, for example, the price of oil or the flow of oil, what would happen if we couldn't guarantee the free flow of oil across the Strait of Hormuz or through the Persian Gulf area? What would happen to the U.S. dollar? Do you think that would? Do you think the petrodollar would cease to exist? I do. In addition to everything else, and of course, we've got people within our own government wanting to kill the U.S. dollar. Well, it all goes back to the one world economy, one world religion, one world political system. So I find it interesting. If you missed it, in case you missed it tonight, we're listening to this program, Barack Hussein Obama, of course, giving a statement about the threat that ISIS presents. And don't forget, all we need to know actually is contained on page 261 of his book, The Audacity of Hope, where he writes, this being Barry Soetoro or Barack Hussein Obama, I will stand with the Muslims should the political winds shift in an ugly direction, and oh, have they. Folks, we are on borrowed time. And I do believe that right now we are seeing the end game play out, the geopolitical end game play out, the stage being set for Bill Salas talked about, and what Steve Quayle talks about, and what Paul McGuire talks about, and all of our guests. What we try to do is connect the dots here on this program. And hopefully we're doing a good job. I want to say hello to the various individuals listening all across the world. Thank you very much for tuning in tonight.
We do have some news. The president gave a speech tonight. Some of the highlights from that: no safe haven. Obama declares airstrike on Islamic State wherever it exists. And we obviously didn't get a chance to listen to what he said, but it says the president on Wednesday outlined a plan to authorize broader U.S. military involvement in hunting down fighters of the notorious Islamic State jihadist group in Iraq and Syria wherever they exist. In the public address to the American people, the president said that they will conduct a systematic campaign of airstrikes against these terrorists. And he goes on to say, from a report from RT, I have made it clear that we will hunt down the terrorists who threaten our country wherever they are. That means I will not hesitate to take action against ISIL in Syria as well as Iraq. This is a core principle of my presidency. If you threaten America, you will find no safe haven. He goes on to say the president's strategy in Syria will be able to support opposition forces, and he again called on Congress to give the U.S. government additional authority and resources to train and equip these fighters, meaning rebel fighters in Syria. Same old, it sounds like.
I truly believe that Obama is a Trojan horse Manchurian candidate wrapped into one. I don't see how he can actually, of course, using the principle of taqiyya, that lying, telling untruths, being actually sanctioned by the Islamic religion, kind of a twist to the communistic theory that the means justify the ends. That's something I think that we're looking at right now. Hey, we'll tell the American people one thing about our strategy, but watch what we do or watch what we don't do, sins of omission, sins of commission, and take that instead of my words to the American people. And I do believe that there are I truly believe that many Islamic leaders are laughing at the stupidity of the American people right now. You know, how can the Americans be so stupid? Don't forget back in the 1940s and 1950s, really beginning in the 1950s, the communist infiltration in America and how McCarthy was demonized. Then Senator Joe McCarthy was demonized. And remember how Hollywood came out and saying, oh, you've ruined careers and lives. And actually it was the House Un-American Activities, which she didn't have anything to do with anyway. But it's interesting to see how the parallels in history between the McCarthy era against communists. And by the way, Joe McCarthy was absolutely 100% correct. You might not, history, or at least revised history, might not show that, but he was 100% correct. Compare those make the parallels between the communist threat in the 50s to the Islamic threat of today. Islam will be used as the communistic tool to usher in the New World Order, and I say that quite frequently, but I do believe that to be the case. And there is, by the way, CNN is hosting, did post a complete transcript of Obama's speech on combating ISIS and terrorism in general. But I think what he's doing is hedging his bets here, because I do believe he's got to have some plausible deniability, especially as we enter into the anniversary of 9/11, both Benghazi as well as the attacks on America, especially with respect to all of the threats that face us. And I think, Joe, he knows. I think they know that there's something being planned. And whether that something being planned is going to use the Muslims as tools, as dupes, I don't know. Or whether they'll allow them to act on their own and to get it, to have them strike here in America on their own. It doesn't matter. What does matter is what is being planned for the other side of that. That's what we're looking at. Of course,
yeah.
It matters to the people involved. But go ahead.
With what I'm reading, he stated tonight, I don't understand how he can say we can and are going to, advance airstrikes against the Islamic State, wherever they are in Iraq or in Syria, at the same time saying they need additional authority for Congress to grant arms to the rebels. Where's the authority to extend airstrikes in these other countries? I mean, it's kind of is this going to be like the immigration, where if they don't act, if he doesn't get the actions from Congress that he expects, then he's going to go ahead and basically decide that he has that authority based on Congress's inaction?
Yes, yes, and thanks for bringing that up. I truly believe that. And folks, remember, it's all about Syria. It always was about Syria, and this is all about Syria, because where are they going to strike? Where would this renegade in chief direct the airstrikes? It would be in Syria. And of course, who will that affect? Of course, Syria, yes, but you've got the allies of Syria, including but not limited to, of course, Russia and China. Russia has got deep strategic military ties to Syria and political ties. China, economic ties to Syria. This does not happen in a vacuum. And I would be interested, folks, and you can help us out too. Take a look at the speech. Take a look at the transcript. I'd be interested to find out if there are any anomalies with respect to the time it began, the number of minutes, anything anomalous with respect to potential anomalies. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to numerically, and we've talked about this before.
Yeah. In other news, radio show host Doug Hagmann uses Google as a verb on his own show and doesn't realize it. This is a report I'm reading from the chat room. Apparently you did. And people have posted the show rules and want answers.
Okay. Well, I need evidence.
I'm going to have to go back and make the whole show again.
I guess if I did use Google as a verb, then I'm going to have to put myself in timeout because that is, we don't have many rules. Now, you can use Corzine as a verb for those who haven't visited the rules page, which we'll be expanding. But you can use Corzine as a verb, but not Google. For example, I've been Corzine, meaning that you've been robbed or burglarized. Perhaps that might even be a better analogy. But that's
all right. No,
all
seriously. In other news, there's been a X1.6 class solar flare, and there's a heading from the AP: scientists solar storm heading toward the Earth. A strong solar flare blasted its way to the Earth, and it goes on to say, but the worst of its power looks like it'll barely skim above the planet and may not cause many problems. And I've seen this, two stories on this. One say that, it's coming directly towards the Earth. One saying it's going to potentially, the most of the energy is going to potentially miss the Earth, which we will hope that is the case. But in either case, it goes on to say that new calculations from the satellite data show the worst energetic particles streaming from the sun will likely go above the Earth this time, it says. But they do go on to say that it is a bad storm and that this is one of the bigger storms they've seen earthbound in a few years. They say that it could knock out radio transmissions and disturb the Earth magnetic field and cause temporary power problems in certain parts of the globe, depending on where it hits and when it hits. Just to keep you getting, and it's expected to hit anytime in the next 48 hours, from where I can gather here from a few different sources.
Right. And folks, you can follow, I just want to add, you can follow this on spaceweather.com. That's spaceweather.com, X flare, and that's active sunspot, A like Apple, R like Roger, 2158. That's AR 2158. So that's what Joe was talking about, and it would be interesting to see what kind of effect it would have. In fact, I think there is a video at that, solarham.net has a video.
Spaceweather.net too, yeah.
Yeah, so, okay, good. All right.
In other news, I don't know if you saw
just Google
it. You're really pushing that tonight. DHS will ask stores to watch customers' buying habits. This from the Washington Times. DHS will ask stores to watch customer buying habits for terrorist clues. Homeland Security Secretary Jen Johnson said the department will be issuing new guidance to retailers this week, giving them pointers on how to spot potential terrorists among their customers by looking at what they are buying. Saying the government cannot prohibit sales of some everyday materials, Mr. Johnson said retailers should be trained to look for anyone who buys a lot from what he described as a long list of materials that could be used as explosive precursors. He said it was an extension of the If You See Something, Say Something campaign launched under his predecessor, Secretary Napolitano, which tries to enlist average Americans to be aware of their immediate environment. We can't and shouldn't prohibit the sale of a pressure cooker. We can sensitize retail businesses to be on guard for suspicious behavior by who is buying this kind of stuff, Mr. Johnson said during a question and answer session after a speech at the Council on Foreign Relations. And it goes on to say, other than pressure cookers, Mr. Johnson did not say what products might appear on the guidance that will be sent to retailers. Mr. Johnson said he is aware of the tenuous balance between security and freedom and does not want to upset this with his moves. He also said there is no current credible information indicating an Islamic State militants who are on the advance in Iraq and Syria are plotting immediate attacks in the U.S. So a whole mouthful there. And he also goes on to talk about bullet purchases or people who are buying ammunition, asking people to be particularly aware of people who are buying mass amounts of ammunition, which I don't see in this article, but this is the headline that it stems from in a separate place, which I'm looking at the Washington Times version right now. So interesting, on the heels of 9/11, you see a piece like that coming out. Also, I don't know if you saw this, Dad, but this is kind of a crazy headline. Maywood, this is out of CBS Chicago. Maywood firefighters claim they were punished for refusing to remove American flag decals from their helmets. Suburban firefighters claim that they are being punished for displaying the U.S. flag on their helmets and lockers. Firefighters in the village of Maywood say they were sent home for refusing to take American flag decals off their equipment. What are they, in high school or in grade school here, sent home? And on the eve of 9/11 anniversary, wouldn't you think that with the firemen and the police that perished in 9/11, that this would be something that would be they would want you to have on, was showing support for your country and your fellow service members who died? But apparently not, as it says, they refused to remove the stickers important to them from their lockers, decals of the American flag. A lot of us take pride in the firehouse because that's where we live. We spend a third of our time there, and we want it to look good. And they say they want to display their patriotism, but the fire chief says among the decals in the firehouse was this picture of a monkey smoking a cigarette, which generated complaints of being racist. The chief said Tuesday night that in order to maintain uniformity, all decals are to be removed. And they justify it by saying, we're following the rules, we're not trying to be disrespectful when talking about removing the American flag from the firefighters' helmets or go home.
How can you not be disrespectful via that action? Yeah, okay, whatever. That is crazy. We've been getting a lot of emails, folks, about the Satanists holding the controversial Black Mass in Oklahoma. Have you folks been following this story? Have you heard about it? Of course, the satanic worshiping group that intends on hosting a satanic Black Mass, planning to go ahead with this controversial ceremony this month.
I saw a few other things. There was also a satanic monument that popped up in an area of Canada overnight. But, if I had a choice, I'd rather not cover that as much as the aspects of what these new Satanists claim their religion consists of, because I think that's where it is really important for people to pay attention. If you notice, and let me try to pull up one of these reports here, they talk about this Satanism as a religion of not as you would think. They talk about, their love of nature and the environment. They say they're not, holding ceremonies or worshiping any deity. They say that it's basically like atheism. And this is, I got to find these articles here because you go ahead and talk about if there's anything on your mind about these that you want to talk about. But I want to find this other article that goes through some of these things that these people are what they believe in and show you how it is still. It might sound good at face value. It might sound not good, but not satanic either or devilish. But it is very, and it's very misleading to people.
Well, I just think that what we're looking at here is just a new level, new lowness of morality here in this country. And to think back to what Steve Quayle had said and always says about there are no political solutions to spiritual problems, and we've got a massive spiritual problem in this country. And I'm sure you're saying, well, tell me something I don't already know. Of course we do. So, but to have it so blatant, and you also have an uptick associated with this blatancy. You've got this uptick in Hollywood coming out with satanic worship, the songs, the acts, the portrayals. You just got a lot of things converging right now. It's absolutely mind-blowing to me, at least I believe. So, but yeah, we don't have to get into that. I just wanted to bring that to at least acknowledge the fact that we've been following this.
Well, they go on to say here that they don't believe in the supernatural, and that's not what the core. They say this is secularism. They believe in science. They believe in environmentalism, and this is just as deceiving, if not more deceiving, than outright believing in some type of deity of evil, because what they're doing here is they're turning the Satan worship into basic, secularism, and it's just as bad. And you see these Satanists saying, they're not involved in the business of rituals, and their dedication is to science and to nature and to, like I said, the environment. Well, this is very misleading, and it's very appealing to especially more young people who are not of any religious denomination. And that is where the appeal sets in, when people find out that they are not actually worshiping something other than what they hope is, they say their hope is that the name and imagery sends silly supernaturalists like us expecting all the wrong things, like cannibalism and human sacrifice, only to have our folly exposed, that what they believe in is nothing supernatural. It's completely scientific and secular. Well, this is just as bad as believing in a supernatural element.
Okay, very good. You might wonder why I'm coming at this topic at this point in time, given all the news. Well, I think it's important for us to understand. Actually, I was doing some research, and I came across the book Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, and I just want to remind everyone Alinsky's 13 rules for, the progressive, communist, Democrat, socialist, whatever you want to call them. The reason, because right now they are using the internet as a tool. For example, I mentioned Media Matters for America. Well, it's interesting how these Alinskyites will direct the conversation, redirect the topics to something it was or not necessarily damaging to their issues. Okay, 13 rules. Rule number 1: power is not only what you have, but what the enemy thinks you have. Now, I'm just going to offer these rules without comment. This is just for your knowledge, in case you don't have a copy of Rules for Radicals sitting on your bookshelf. Please be aware of these, because it's taking place all across the internet right now and elsewhere. So number 1, power is not only what you have, but what the enemy thinks you have. Number 2, never go outside the expertise of your people. Interesting. Number 3, whenever possible, go outside of the expertise of the enemy. 4, make the enemy live up to their own book of rules. 5, ridicule is man's most potent weapon. 6, a good tactic is one your people enjoy. 7, a tactic that drags on too long becomes a drag. 8, keep the pressure on with different tactics and actions and utilize all events of the period for your purpose. 9, the threat is usually more terrifying than the thing itself. 10, the major premise for tactics is the development of operations that will maintain a constant pressure upon the opposition. 11, if you push a negative hard enough and deep enough, it's going to break through into its counter side. 12, the price of a successful attack is a constructive alternative. And 13, pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it. Now, we all know that Alinsky was an admirer of Lucifer, of course, the radical angel. In fact, the book, at least the original book, copies of the book were dedicated to Lucifer. That's has since, over the last couple of years, been excised from the book. But, I can't believe it. I mean, he dedicated his book, Rules for Radicals, to Lucifer. Alinsky so admired Lucifer, he wanted to join Satan in hell. If you go back to 1972, Playboy magazine did an interview with Alinsky. Now, it was an extensive interview, and of course, Playboy magazine. And remember, I think it was Paul McGuire, wasn't it, or was it Nathan Leal, or who was talking about the Playboy bunny logo? But nonetheless, Playboy magazine, he did an extensive interview with them. Toward the end of this long interview, Alinsky was asked about death and afterlife. And now, it's interesting because a lot of these people will claim to be agnostics or say, well, I really don't know about God existing. He said he was brought up by Orthodox Jews and considered himself to be a devout Jew until he was 12 years old. And then he went through some pretty rapid withdrawal symptoms and kicked the habit. That's his words, not mine. Nevertheless, he told Playboy, but I'll tell you one thing about religious identity. Whenever anyone asks me about my religion, I always say, and always will, Jewish. See how things get started. You see the anti-Semitism here being built up. Playboy, the interviewer, asked Alinsky, do you believe in any kind of afterlife? Alinsky said, well, sometimes it seems to me that the question people should ask is not, is there life after death, but is there life after birth? I don't know whether there's anything after this or not. I haven't seen evidence one way or the other, and I don't think anyone else has either. But I do know that man's obsession with this question comes out of a stubborn refusal to face his own mortality. Let's just say that if there is an afterlife and I have anything to say about it, I will unreservedly choose, you ready for this, to go to hell. And I'll tell you, of course, Playboy, I'll just follow up with this. Playboy says, well, the interviewer asked him why. I mean, of all the things, why? And Alinsky said, hell would be heaven for me. All my life, I've been with the have-nots. Over here, if you're a have-not, you're short of dough. If you're a have-not hell, you're short of virtue. Once I get into hell, I'll start organizing the have-nots over there. Interesting theory. The reason I brought this up now, Obama having his cutting his teeth in politics or in the public world on community organizing and holding Alinsky as really his mentor, if you will. There you have it. That's what we're facing. And I bring that up just to show people what we're facing. And those tactics, the 13 tactics I mentioned, folks, this is what we're facing. Internet trolls, this is what we're facing. Emails, this is what we're facing. These are the Alinsky tactics. And what is behind the Alinsky tactics. You might hear about the Alinsky tactics on other radio shows, but now you know what's behind it. So I've passed along that research to you.
I don't know if I forgot to mention this with Bill Salas on the air, but Henry Kissinger made some remarks of how he feels that Iran is a bigger threat to the United States than ISIS is. Did you happen to see that?
Yes.
I thought that was interesting. We have...
well, we're building, to answer, I should have expanded on that when you asked me. You're building on the perception. I believe you're building on a perception here, Iran being the bigger threat. there's two things, really. You're taking the focus from ISIS, which was a creation, and it's being maintained by U.S. Western intelligence, Saudi, intelligence. And you might not think that. It doesn't make sense, logical sense. But again, nothing in this Middle Eastern situation makes a whole lot of sense. And you're also looking at Iran and demonizing Iran. Not that Iran shouldn't be demonized for the nuclear program. It's operating the hierarchy of Iran. But don't forget, back in what Bill Salas did mention was the Iranian Revolution back in 1979. And folks, don't forget, there were two different embassy takeovers in 1979, one in February and one in November. So, and the one in November was the one that, of course, that everyone remembers, where the 52 hostages were held for 444 days. So, when you look at all of this, this fits right in with that biblical prophecy, at least in my view. If you go and you take a look at Iran, nuclear showdown, ? Of course, and the prophecy of Elam, it does fit. It all fits. But and I think Bill used a great analogy there about a neighbor, about the neighborhood with respect to a threat to another neighbor, and then a third neighbor, and this is what we're seeing over there. It's a mess. It's a mess. It's a mess.
Yeah, and going back to the some of the communist aspects you're talking about, this was released in theweek.com. America is running out of jobs. It's time for a universal basic income. The politics of a guaranteed income got a lot easier when you acknowledge the U.S. is no longer the land of opportunity. It says free money for everyone. With weak job growth, rising poverty, and the rich continuing to devour nearly all economic growth, it's an idea that is gaining more credence. Arguments for a universal basic income, which they have abbreviated to UBI, in which everyone without exception would receive an equal wage, have flourished in policy-centric areas of the Internet, including the weak. Advocates of the UBI see it as a blunder for more effective means of reducing poverty and shrinking the inequality gap. But even if the UBI proponents are right on the merits, Tyler Cohen argues that the political issues are unfavorable. Most of the plausible assumptions about the basic income level, most people would not be recipients, nor would they expect to be potential net gainers from the program. In general, voters put much more importance on common sense notions of desert do than economists. So then I think, why send money to the people who aren't working? Institutions will crowd out the I want to think of myself as someone who helps other people feeling. It goes on to say here that the whole idea is that everyone would be included under this universal, this UBI, universal basic income. And I mean, this is just communism at its finest economically. Imagine being somebody who makes the minimum wage working at a McDonald's versus a senior marketing director at a bigger corporation. Everybody would be making the same amount of money, and it would be the law. It would be put into law that there would be, just like there's no keeping track of scores and sporting events and for children anymore, just like there's no winners or losers in different academic and athletic events in schools. This would be a uniform mandatory income for all humans, not just here in America, but all across the globe is what they want to do with this universal wage. And it's a sick joke, This is communist economics and globalization ideals, right? Being brought up here at the forefront. And not only that, what is even worse when reading through the comments is there's a lot more people who are on these internet message boards for whatever reason that seem to think this is a good idea. At times when our economy is at an all-time low when it comes to jobs. In other news, the media is not reporting the terrible poll numbers of our president so far this year. The big three networks have only mentioned President Obama's poor approval ratings twice in their evening newscasts. In the same time period, those networks have commissioned 15 polls on the president's approval rating, according to a Media Research Center study. It just goes on to say that it goes on to say how there's an article on Drudge how the president's statements tonight echoed Bush 41. It says echoes lines from Bush 41 in his speech tonight, but his approval rating is lower than second Bush at this time in his presidency. But the media is not telling the people how low his approval ratings are. We've seen all-time low approval ratings of Congress, of pretty much all leadership, and now, through for our commander-in-chief or renegade-in-chief, more than 50% of the public disapproves of his job, and I imagine it's going to get much worse. And one thing that we see here is that immigration efforts were said not going to be taken until after the latest midterm elections, meaning, and I saw this here today, that this brought up not bringing in the amnesty issues or not pushing through the executive orders on immigration until after the midterm elections would be a problem for Obama, because if the Republicans gained a majority in the Senate, well, how could he go ahead and push through executive amnesty without having a law passed? Well, he's going to do it either way, whether there's a Republican Senate or not. And does it really matter if there's a majority one way or other in the House or Senate at this point in time?
No, I think it's much too late. I really do. Folks, we've got a very long day tomorrow. We're going to be on the radio shows. Josh Tully from 10 to noon
Eastern time,
and then Paul Begley from 1 to 2 Eastern time. Okay, and then we've got the other things in between before the show, and then of course we've got our show. So we also have some work being done, technical work being done, hopefully to improve certain sound quality issues. So with that, and that's taking place right after the show, and it lasts for, I don't know, 35, 40 minutes per night. So we're trying something different now to hopefully increase the quality of the archival archives for the show. Having said that, don't forget, folks, we're in a very precarious position, a very precarious time right now. We're looking at the anniversary of 9/11 tomorrow, not just 9/11/2001, but the anniversary of Benghazi. You've got to know that things are closing fast. So the only recommendation I have for you is just to be very careful. Watch your surroundings. Expect the unexpected. If I can leave you with anything, expect the unexpected, Joe.
Yeah, we don't know what, if anything's going to happen tomorrow. There's been a lot of predictions, a lot of hype, and you just don't know. You're just going to have to watch and keep your eye out. And ever since 9/11, 13 years ago, we've seen how far our country has went into decay. I don't think they need a special day to pull out these kind of stunts anymore, but I think they will use their numerology. In fact, when they do, we know there are so many threats both outside and inside our country that things can happen to us. There's so many threats, natural and man-made, that can happen to us. As you said, we just need to continue in prayer. We need to seek the Lord, and we need to keep aware of our surroundings. We need to keep aware of what's going on around us. But we always need to make sure we have a positive attitude and our focus on the Lord, and we will be just fine. And that's all the advice I can give. But tomorrow, once again, we will be on with Josh Tully from 10 to noon, and then an hour later on Pastor Paul Begley from 1 to 2. So make sure that you tune in, and we'll be here at our regular time, 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern, and hope all of you are here. I want to thank Bill Salas for being on tonight. It was a fantastic interview. For those of you who missed it, his latest book, Nuclear Showdown in Iran, Revealing the Ancient Prophecy of Elam, at his website, you can go to www.prophecydepot.com and see not just this book, but all his books there, Israelistine, Psalm 83, Revelation Road, and this one. Definitely a very interesting book. Let me thank Bill for coming on. It was a fantastic interview.
All right, folks, that'll do it for us for tonight. God bless. Stay safe. Until tomorrow.